Have you ever felt like your mind is a prison, like you're stuck inside your own head, replaying the same thoughts over and over, trapped in an endless loop of what-ifs and should-haves? It's exhausting, isn't it? You lie awake at night, analyzing conversations from years ago. You replay every mistake, every missed opportunity, every possible future disaster. And the worst part, no matter how much you think, it never gives you peace. But what if I told you that your thoughts were never the problem? What if the real issue isn't thinking itself, but the way you've been taught to think? For over 2,500 years, Buddhism has studied the human mind, uncovering powerful truths about why we overthink, why we suffer, and most importantly, how to break free. These teachings are not abstract theories. They're practical, tested, and, if applied, will completely change the way you experience life. Because right now, whether you realize it or not, your mind is working against you. It's like a wild horse, dragging you wherever it pleases. One moment, it's galloping into the past, drowning you in regret. The next, it's sprinting toward the future, filling you with fear. But here's the secret. You don't have to ride this horse. You can step off. Today, we're going to uncover 8 Buddhist truths that will finally show you how to free yourself from the endless storm of overthinking. Some of these will challenge everything you thought you knew about your own mind. Others will feel like the missing piece you've been searching for. But by the end of this, one thing is certain: you will never look at your thoughts the same way again. Are you ready? Let's begin. Before we move forward, take a moment to reflect on a simple yet unsettling truth. Most of the suffering in life comes not from what happens to us, but from what our minds do with what happens. The endless thinking, the constant analysis, the scenarios that play out in loops. It's as if the mind refuses to let go, as if it's addicted to its own noise. But have you ever stopped to ask why? Why does the mind cling so desperately to certain thoughts? Why does it replay the past, fear the future, and analyze the present to death? This is where things get interesting. Buddhism doesn't just acknowledge this problem, it dissects it, breaks it apart, and reveals the hidden mechanics behind it. It teaches that overthinking is not an accident. It's not just some random habit. It has a function, a purpose, a cause. And once you understand that cause, you can begin to untangle yourself from its grip. The human mind, by design, is meant to think. It is a tool for problem solving, for survival, for planning ahead. But somewhere along the way, it turned against us. Instead of being a servant, it became the master. Instead of guiding us, it started controlling us. The problem is not that we think too much. It's that we don't know how to stop. The moment we wake up, thoughts flood in like an unstoppable tide, pushing and pulling us in every direction. Buddhism calls this suffering dukkha, a state of unease, dissatisfaction, and mental exhaustion. And the root of this suffering, attachment. The mind clings to thoughts because it believes they are important, necessary, even part of our identity. A painful memory resurfaces, and instead of letting it pass, we grip onto it, analyze it, question it, relive it. A future worry appears, and instead of acknowledging it and moving on, we entertain it, expand it, breathe life into it. This clinging is what keeps the cycle going. A thought arises, and instead of watching it float away, we grab hold of it and refuse to let go. We reinforce it, strengthen it, build entire stories around it. And the more we do this, the stronger the habit becomes. We don't realize that thoughts are meant to be like clouds in the sky, passing, shifting, moving. Instead, we treat them like stone walls, fixed and immovable. This is why overthinking feels so heavy. The weight of thoughts builds up, one on top of another, creating a mental burden that never seems to lift. And here's where it gets worse. Our thoughts do not exist in isolation. Each one triggers an emotion. Each emotion triggers another thought. Before long, one simple worry about the future turns into a full-blown mental storm. It's not just one thought, it's an entire web of thoughts, all feeding off each other, reinforcing each other, looping endlessly. Buddhist philosophy teaches that this cycle continues because of a deep misunderstanding, the belief that thoughts are reality. The mind treats its own stories as truth. If a thought says, "I am not good enough," we believe it. If a thought says, "Something bad will happen," we prepare for disaster. We rarely stop to question, is this thought even real? Is it accurate? Or is it just another illusion, another habit of the mind? And that is the first step to freedom. Understanding that your thoughts are not reality. They are merely appearances in consciousness, temporary flickers of energy passing through the mind. But because we mistake them for absolute truth, we give them far more power than they deserve. This is where suffering begins. This also explains why overthinking feels endless. The mind clings to thoughts, not because it wants to torture us, but because it mistakenly believes that thinking is the solution to everything. If something bothers you, the mind assumes that thinking about it over and over will solve it. If something worries you, the mind assumes that analyzing it from every angle will protect you from danger. If something upsets you, the mind assumes that replaying it will somehow change what happened. But what if the mind is wrong? What if more thinking isn't the answer, but the problem? Buddhist wisdom tells us that the mind is like a wild horse. If left untamed, it runs in every direction, dragging us along with it. But it can be trained, it can be understood, and most importantly, it can be quieted. Not by force, not by suppression, but by wisdom, by seeing through the illusion that thoughts are in control. The cycle of overthinking is fueled by something deeper: fear. The fear of uncertainty, the fear of loss, the fear of making the wrong decision, the fear of the unknown. Every time the mind overthinks, it is searching for reassurance, for control, for some kind of guarantee that everything will be okay. But here's the hard truth. There are no guarantees. No amount of thinking will ever make life predictable. No amount of analyzing will ever remove uncertainty. This is why Buddhist philosophy teaches letting go. Not letting go in the sense of giving up, but letting go in the sense of trusting life itself. Trusting that things will unfold as they should, whether or not you analyze them. Trusting that you don't need to solve every problem in your mind. Trusting that thoughts will come and go, and you don't have to follow every single one. The greatest illusion the mind creates is the belief that thinking is necessary for peace. But true peace is the absence of mental struggle, and that struggle ends when you stop treating every thought like a command. The practice of mindfulness, a cornerstone of Buddhist wisdom, is the key to breaking this habit. It teaches you to step back and simply watch your thoughts without getting caught in them. Instead of being inside the thought, you become the observer of the thought. And when you observe without attachment, something extraordinary happens. The thought loses its grip on you. This is the real secret. Thoughts only have power when you engage with them. If you stop feeding them attention, they dissolve on their own. You don't have to fight them, suppress them, or replace them with positive ones. You just have to stop treating them as reality. Once you see that thoughts are like passing clouds, impermanent, insubstantial, empty of real substance, you stop clinging. And when you stop clinging, overthinking naturally fades. Not because you forced it to go away, but because you no longer give it a reason to stay. But here's where most people get stuck. They try to control their thoughts. They tell themselves, I shouldn't be thinking this, or I need to stop overthinking. But do you see the problem? That itself is another thought, another layer of overthinking. You cannot end mental noise by adding more noise. You can only end it by stepping outside of it. This is why Buddhist monks practice silence, not just physical silence, but mental silence. They understand that the mind is like a lake. If you constantly stir the water, it remains cloudy and chaotic. But if you stop stirring, it naturally becomes clear. This is the invitation of Buddhist wisdom, to stop stirring the mind, to let go of the need to solve, predict, analyze, and control everything, to see thoughts for what they are, temporary, fleeting, not worth holding on to. The burden of thought is heavy, but you are the one carrying it. And just as you picked it up, you can set it down. The next time your mind pulls you into another loop of overthinking, ask yourself one simple question. Do I have to engage with this thought? If the answer is no, let it pass. That is the beginning of freedom. Thoughts only have power when they are fed. The moment you stop engaging with them, they lose their grip. But what keeps pulling you back in? What makes the mind refuse to let go, even when logic says it should? There is something deeper at play, an invisible force that fuels overthinking more than anything else. The need for control. The mind craves certainty. It wants to predict, plan, and analyze every possible outcome. It believes that if it can just think long enough, hard enough, and in the right way, it will find a way to control the future. It's a survival instinct, deeply embedded in human nature. The need for control makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. The more we understand and predict, the better we can avoid danger. But here's the problem. Life is unpredictable. The world is uncertain. And no amount of thinking can ever change that. This is where overthinking begins. The mind mistakes excessive thought for control. It believes that replaying a situation will prevent mistakes. It believes that worrying about the future will somehow prepare for every possible problem. It believes that analyzing every word, every action, every outcome will create a sense of safety. But this is an illusion. Control is not the same as safety, and overthinking is not the same as preparation. Buddhism teaches that the root of suffering is attachment, and one of the deepest attachments is the attachment to certainty. The human mind clings to the idea that if things are predictable, they will be manageable. This is why people try to control outcomes, relationships, and even emotions. The mind creates elaborate plans, convincing itself that if every detail is accounted for, there will be no surprises. But when life inevitably doesn't go according to plan, stress, anxiety, and frustration arise. The more someone resists uncertainty, the more suffering they create. The mind goes into overdrive, replaying every possible scenario, asking endless what-ifs, and trying to grasp control over things that cannot be controlled. This is why some people get trapped in analysis paralysis. The fear of the unknown becomes so overwhelming that they believe they cannot act until they have absolute certainty. They wait for the perfect decision, the perfect moment, the perfect guarantee. And in that waiting, life slips by. This is where Buddhist wisdom offers a radical shift in perspective. Instead of fighting uncertainty, it teaches the art of surrender. Not surrender in the sense of giving up, but surrender in the sense of releasing the impossible task of controlling the uncontrollable. There is a Buddhist concept called anicca, which means impermanence. Everything changes. Thoughts, emotions, circumstances, nothing stays the same. Clinging to control is like trying to hold on to water. No matter how tightly you grip, it will slip through your fingers. The more you try to force certainty, the more exhausted you become. The only way to find peace is to let go of the illusion that certainty even exists. Letting go of control does not mean becoming passive or reckless. It means understanding that no amount of overthinking will remove uncertainty from life. It means realizing that fear of the unknown does not prevent bad things from happening. It only prevents you from living fully. Buddhism encourages trust, not blind faith, but trust in the natural unfolding of life. This is called Wu Wei, or effortless action. It means responding to situations as they arise, without the need to control every outcome in advance. A person who practices this does not resist change or cling to fixed plans. They adapt, flow, and respond with awareness rather than fear. This mindset shift is powerful. It allows the mind to slow down. It eliminates the pressure to figure everything out at once. It creates space to act rather than being frozen in over-analysis. The need for control shrinks, and with it, the burden of overthinking. One of the biggest traps of overthinking is the belief that every decision must be perfect. The mind assumes that if the wrong choice is made, disaster will follow. This is why people struggle with decisions, big and small. They feel paralyzed, afraid of making a mistake, afraid of regret, afraid of an unknown consequence. But the truth is, no decision is ever perfect. Every choice carries risk. Every path has both benefits and drawbacks. Buddhist teachings encourage accepting this reality. Instead of trying to predict and control every outcome, the focus shifts to acting with intention in the present moment. There is a Zen phrase, "Move, and the way will open." This means that clarity does not come from overthinking. It comes from taking action, adjusting as needed, and trusting that whatever comes will be handled. Overthinking also comes from a fear of loss. People want to secure their relationships, their finances, their health, their happiness. They want guarantees that what they love will not be taken away. But Buddhism teaches that all things are temporary. Clinging to control only creates suffering because it fights against the natural truth of change. This is why Buddhist monks practice detachment, not from caring, but from the illusion of control. They accept that everything is transient, and in that acceptance, they find peace. They do not fear uncertainty, because they do not resist it. This same mindset can be applied to everyday life. Instead of obsessing over an uncertain future, there can be a shift toward presence. Instead of trying to control a relationship, there can be a shift toward experiencing it fully without fear. Instead of avoiding decisions, there can be a shift toward making them with awareness, knowing that perfection is an illusion. This does not mean ignoring responsibility. It means releasing the mental weight of trying to predict and control what cannot be predicted or controlled. It means trusting that whatever happens, there will be a way forward. Many people resist this idea because they equate control with security. But security is not found in control. It is found in adaptability. The more someone tries to force life into a rigid plan, the more painful it becomes when things don't go according to that plan. But the person who is flexible, who accepts change, who understands that uncertainty is part of life, that person is unshaken. Buddhist practice includes meditation not just to calm the mind, but to develop comfort with stillness. In stillness, the illusion of control is exposed. The mind wants to chase, analyze, solve. But in meditation, it learns to sit, to observe, to let things pass without attachment. This simple practice rewires the brain. It trains the mind to stop grasping. Letting go of control is one of the hardest lessons to learn because the need for certainty is deeply ingrained. But once this lesson is understood, a new kind of freedom opens up. Life no longer feels like a battle against the unknown. The mind no longer feels the need to carry every possibility at once. Thoughts lose their urgency. Decisions become lighter. Worry becomes unnecessary. Buddhism does not promise that uncertainty will go away. It does not offer a way to predict the future. What it offers is something even more valuable: the ability to be at peace despite uncertainty, the ability to live fully without needing control. This is the shift that ends overthinking, not by trying to force it away, but by no longer feeding the mind's false belief that it must have certainty to be safe. And once that belief is gone, what remains is clarity. What remains is peace. What remains is the freedom to move through life, unburdened by the need to control it. Letting go of control removes a heavy weight from the mind, but that doesn't mean the mind suddenly becomes still. Even when there is an understanding that certainty is an illusion, something strange continues to happen. The mind keeps running. It jumps from one thought to another, pulling attention in every direction, making it impossible to feel settled. The noise never stops. Even in quiet moments, thoughts swing wildly between past regrets and future worries, between distractions and imagined scenarios. There is no pause, no rest, just an endless cycle of mental movement. This chaotic state is not personal failure, nor is it a sign that something is wrong. It is simply the way an untrained mind behaves. Buddhism refers to this as the monkey mind, a restless, unfocused, constantly moving mental state that refuses to settle. Just like a monkey swinging from branch to branch, the mind leaps from one thought to another without control, unable to stay in one place. The more unchecked it is, the more exhausting it becomes. The monkey mind is the reason why even in moments of stillness, the mind does not feel still. The body may be sitting, the external world may be calm, but internally, thoughts race without pause. It happens in conversations, when instead of listening, the mind is already thinking about what to say next. It happens during meals, when instead of tasting food, thoughts wander to other things. It happens before sleep, when instead of resting, thoughts replay the events of the day. Even in the middle of an enjoyable experience, the mind can pull away, dragging attention elsewhere. This is what makes peace seem so distant. Even when life is going well, there is always something running in the background, something to analyze, something to plan, something to replay. The monkey mind is why overthinking is so difficult to escape. It doesn't allow for focus. It makes stillness feel uncomfortable. It creates the habit of filling every moment with unnecessary thoughts. But here is the real problem. It convinces people that this is normal, that thinking non-stop is simply part of being human, that the constant mental noise is unavoidable. But Buddhism teaches otherwise. It reveals that the mind is not meant to be chaotic, that it can be trained, that this restless state is not the natural way of being. It is simply an untrained habit. This restless habit has deep roots. The mind developed to scan for threats, to always be on alert, to react quickly. This was useful for survival. But in modern life, it has turned into something destructive. Instead of protecting, it agitates. Instead of helping, it distracts. It makes small problems seem big. It creates stress where none is needed. It keeps people lost in thought when they should be present. The more the monkey mind is left unchecked, the more it takes control. One of the biggest misunderstandings is thinking that the solution to overthinking is to stop thinking. But forcing the mind to be silent only creates more struggle. The mind cannot be controlled through force. It can only be redirected. The key is not suppression, but awareness. Instead of getting caught in thought after thought, it becomes possible to step back, observe, and slowly train the mind to focus. This is why meditation is such an important part of Buddhist practice. It is not about achieving silence, but about understanding the nature of thoughts. When someone sits in meditation, the first thing they notice is how restless their mind is, how thoughts appear one after another, completely uninvited, how difficult it is to stay present without being pulled away. But over time, with continued practice, something changes. Awareness grows. Instead of being lost in thoughts, there is a shift, an ability to see thoughts arise and let them go, without reacting to them. The monkey mind loses its power when it is seen for what it is, just noise, not reality. One of the simplest ways to begin taming the monkey mind is through breath awareness. The breath is always present. It is always happening. But most people ignore it. When attention is placed on the breath, even for a few seconds, something happens. The mind becomes anchored. Thoughts still appear, but instead of following them, attention stays with the breath. The more this is practiced, the more the habit of distraction weakens. It does not happen instantly, but it happens. The monkey mind is not tamed through force, but through gentle training, moment by moment, breath by breath. Another key method taught in Buddhism is single tasking. The monkey mind thrives on doing multiple things at once, eating while scrolling through a phone, talking while thinking about something else, walking while mentally planning the day. It is constantly jumping, dividing attention, making it impossible to be fully present in anything. But the mind can be trained to stay with one thing at a time. Drinking tea can be just drinking tea. Walking can be just walking. Speaking can be just speaking. This is not just about being mindful. It is about undoing the habit of mental scattering. The reason why people struggle with stillness is because they have spent years, even decades, strengthening the habit of mental restlessness. If every moment is filled with noise, distraction, and over-analysis, then when silence appears, the mind resists. It searches for something to grab onto. But the more it is trained in focus, the more comfortable stillness becomes. Instead of feeling like emptiness, stillness begins to feel like relief. Buddhism also teaches the importance of detachment from thoughts. The monkey mind is powerful because it convinces people that every thought matters, that every mental story is important. But this is not true. Most thoughts are nothing more than passing noise. They appear, they stay for a while, and then they fade. The problem is that people attach to them, believe them, give them energy. But when the habit of observing without attachment is developed, thoughts lose their hold. They are still there, but they no longer control emotions, actions, or decisions. There is a difference between having thoughts and being caught in thoughts. The trained mind still has thoughts, but it does not follow every single one. It does not allow every passing worry to create stress. It does not let every old memory pull it back into the past. It does not react to every small discomfort. It watches thoughts come and go, without losing itself in them. This is not about making the mind blank. It is about creating space between thoughts and awareness. The monkey mind thrives on immediate reaction. One thought leads to another, until it becomes an endless spiral. But when awareness steps in, there is a pause, a moment of choice. A thought arises, but instead of following it, it is simply noticed. This space changes everything. It breaks the automatic habit of mental movement. The more awareness grows, the easier it becomes to return to the present, to stop chasing thoughts that don't matter, to stop filling every quiet moment with unnecessary mental noise. The monkey mind cannot survive in stillness. The more comfortable stillness becomes, the weaker its grip. Buddhism teaches that the mind is like a lake. When disturbed, the water becomes cloudy, making it impossible to see clearly. But when left undisturbed, the water settles, revealing everything beneath the surface. The mind is the same. When thoughts are constantly stirred, clarity disappears. But when thoughts are allowed to settle without interference, the mind becomes clear. This clarity is not something external. It is already present, but it is hidden beneath the noise. The monkey mind is what covers it, what keeps people trapped in overthinking, what makes life feel overwhelming. But just as clouds cannot block the sun forever, mental chaos cannot last forever when awareness is cultivated. The process of taming the monkey mind is not about perfection. Thoughts will still arise, distractions will still happen, but over time, the difference becomes clear. Instead of being controlled by thoughts, there is freedom from them. Instead of being overwhelmed by mental noise, there is an ability to step back. Instead of being dragged by the mind in every direction, there is a sense of calm. This is not an abstract idea. It is something that can be experienced. It does not require drastic changes, only a shift in how the mind is related to. Less attachment, more awareness. Less distraction, more presence. Slowly, the restless energy begins to fade. The habit of constant movement weakens, and what remains is something few people ever experience: a mind that is truly at peace. Even as the restless mind begins to settle, another challenge remains: reaction. Thoughts may slow down, but the tendency to react instantly remains strong. The mind is conditioned to respond automatically, without pause, without reflection. A comment is made, and irritation rises. A problem appears, and stress follows. An uncertainty lingers, and worry takes over. The cycle continues, not because thoughts are inherently powerful, but because there is no space between them and the reaction that follows. This is where the real battle is fought, not in trying to control thoughts, but in learning how to create space before reacting to them. The ability to pause is the key to breaking unconscious patterns. Without pause, everything happens in an automatic loop. Thoughts trigger emotions, emotions trigger behaviors, and before awareness even steps in, the reaction is already in motion. This is how people find themselves in arguments they regret, worrying about things that don't matter, and making choices they later question. The mind follows its old programming, repeating the same patterns again and again. But the moment there is a pause, the cycle is interrupted. A single pause is enough to create awareness. It is a moment of stillness in which choice becomes possible. Instead of reacting out of habit, there is space to see things clearly. Instead of getting lost in emotional turbulence, there's a gap in which calmness can enter. This small shift changes everything, because it is not the initial thought or feeling that creates suffering. It is the immediate, unconscious reaction to it. Buddhism teaches that reaction is a result of attachment. When something happens, the mind assigns meaning to it. If the meaning is positive, attachment forms, and there is pleasure. If the meaning is negative, resistance forms, and there is suffering. But in both cases, the reaction is automatic. The pause removes this automation. It allows the moment to be seen as it is, before personal meaning is added to it. Pausing before reacting is an ancient practice. It is the foundation of mindfulness, the essence of self-mastery, the mark of true wisdom. The greatest thinkers, the most resilient individuals, and those who move through life with peace, all have this in common. They do not react impulsively. They respond with awareness. They do not let emotions hijack their actions. They do not let fleeting thoughts determine their reality. They create space between what happens and how they respond. This space does not appear naturally. It must be cultivated. The modern mind is conditioned for speed, instant responses, immediate reactions, constant movement. Society rewards quick decisions, rapid opinions, and immediate action. But speed does not equal wisdom. Most mistakes are made in haste. Most conflicts are fueled by impulsive words. Most regrets come from acting before thinking. The pause eliminates this unnecessary suffering. It slows the mind down just enough to allow wisdom to enter. Practicing the pause is difficult at first. The mind is not used to waiting. It craves resolution. It wants to immediately fix, defend, attack, or escape. But each time a pause is inserted, the grip of automatic reaction weakens. There is no need to fight thoughts. There is no need to suppress emotions. There is only the simple act of waiting, watching, allowing. And in that brief moment, something profound happens. The mind sees clearly. When something upsetting happens, pausing before reacting creates a shift. Instead of being swept away by frustration, there is a chance to observe the emotion rising. Instead of lashing out, there is a moment to decide if a response is even necessary. Most reactions lose their intensity the moment they are given space. What feels urgent in the heat of the moment often dissolves when given time. Pausing is especially powerful in conversation. Words spoken in anger cannot be taken back. Reactions driven by ego can destroy relationships. A pause before speaking allows for a choice. Will these words add to suffering, or will they reduce it? Will they be spoken from awareness or from impulse? Silence, even for a few seconds, can completely change the course of an interaction. The same is true for written words. Emails, texts, and messages sent in haste often carry emotional weight that is unnecessary. Waiting before pressing send creates an opportunity to reconsider, to refine, to ensure that what is being communicated is what is truly meant. Overthinking and reactivity are closely linked. The mind that reacts instantly is the same mind that overanalyzes. Both come from the inability to sit with uncertainty. A person who reacts quickly does so because they cannot tolerate the discomfort of an unresolved situation. They want an immediate conclusion. The same is true for overthinking. It is an attempt to resolve discomfort by thinking through every possibility. But both habits only create more suffering. Pausing is the antidote to both. It trains the mind to sit with discomfort, to not rush to resolve every thought, to not act on every feeling. Buddhist monks practice pausing not just in speech or action, but in thought itself. When a thought arises, instead of immediately engaging with it, they observe it. They do not resist it, but they do not follow it either. They let it pass like a cloud in the sky. This is what gives them their unshakable peace. They do not rush to conclusions. They do not react to every fleeting emotion. They wait, they watch, they let go. Pausing also changes the way decisions are made. Most poor decisions come from impatience. The need for a quick answer overrides the ability to see things clearly. The pause prevents this mistake. It allows time for deeper understanding, for intuition to emerge, for emotions to settle. The greatest minds in history all understood this principle. They did not rush. They reflected. They allowed space for clarity. There is a reason why people are drawn to those who remain calm under pressure. It is not about suppressing emotion. It is about creating space before acting. The pause is what separates those who are controlled by their emotions from those who master them. It is what separates those who are constantly overwhelmed from those who move through life with grace. Training the mind to pause requires daily practice. It starts with small moments. Before responding in a conversation, take a breath. Before reacting to frustration, wait a few seconds. Before acting on impulse, hold back for just a moment. Each time this is done, the habit of immediate reaction weakens. The ability to observe rather than react grows stronger. Meditation is the ultimate form of practicing the pause. It is a space where nothing needs to be done, where thoughts can appear without engagement, where emotions can rise without immediate reaction. It is a training ground for the mind, teaching it that not every thought needs a response, not every feeling needs an action. The pause is powerful because it creates freedom. Without it, life is a constant chain of automatic reactions. With it, there is choice, there is clarity, there is space for wisdom. Over time, the mind shifts. It stops being a slave to impulse. It stops being dragged by every passing thought. It stops being lost in unnecessary suffering. This is not a theory. It is a lived experience. It is a way of moving through life with greater ease, greater patience, and greater understanding. The pause does not mean inaction. It does not mean detachment from life. It means responding with awareness instead of reacting from habit. It means allowing space for things to unfold instead of forcing them into immediate resolution. Each moment of pause strengthens inner peace. Each time reactivity is interrupted, the mind becomes more still. The more this is practiced, the more natural it becomes. And eventually, what once felt difficult becomes effortless. The mind no longer rushes. The emotions no longer take over. The thoughts no longer dictate action. Instead, there is control, not through force, but through understanding. The ability to pause is one of the greatest gifts a person can develop. It leads to fewer regrets, fewer unnecessary conflicts, fewer moments of unnecessary stress. It allows for deeper relationships, better decisions, and a mind that is no longer trapped in constant reaction. This is the secret of those who move through life with wisdom. They do not let their minds control them. They do not act out of impulse. They create space between thought and action, and in that space, they find something most never experience: true freedom. Pausing before reacting allows clarity to emerge, but clarity alone is not enough. There is another layer to overthinking, something deeper that keeps people trapped in endless mental loops. It is the habit of over-intellectualizing life instead of experiencing it directly. The mind, instead of simply engaging with the present moment, distances itself by analyzing, categorizing, and constantly interpreting what is happening. This creates a barrier between reality and experience. Instead of fully living, the mind becomes obsessed with understanding, explaining, and labeling everything. This habit seems harmless, even useful, but it is actually a powerful distraction that prevents true engagement with life. Buddhism teaches that thinking and experiencing are two entirely different things. A person can spend hours thinking about joy, but that is not the same as feeling joy. They can analyze love in depth, but that is not the same as being in love. They can study every aspect of peace, but that is not the same as being at peace. The modern mind is conditioned to believe that thinking about something is the same as knowing it. But knowledge is not wisdom, and intellectual understanding is not the same as direct experience. Overthinking is an escape disguised as insight. It gives the illusion of control, the feeling of solving problems, the appearance of deep understanding, but in reality, it keeps life at a distance. The more something is analyzed, the less it is truly felt. The mind that is constantly thinking about an experience is not fully engaged in that experience. Instead of tasting a meal, the mind is comparing it to past meals, analyzing the ingredients, evaluating whether it is good or bad. Instead of being present with a loved one, the mind is interpreting their words, replaying past conversations, or anticipating future conflicts. Instead of feeling an emotion fully, the mind is trying to dissect it, explain it, or justify it. This creates a gap between the individual and the moment itself. This habit is deeply ingrained because it feels productive. The mind assumes that by thinking more, it is gaining wisdom. But there is a limit to how much thought is useful. Beyond a certain point, thinking stops being a tool and becomes a barrier. It prevents immersion, it removes spontaneity, it makes everything feel distant and complicated. It turns life into a problem to be solved rather than an experience to be lived. Buddhism points to direct experience as the way to cut through overthinking. Instead of trying to understand life intellectually, it encourages full participation. This means feeling emotions without dissecting them, engaging with people without constantly interpreting their motives, and doing things without obsessing over whether they are being done perfectly. It means allowing life to unfold without needing to categorize, explain, or rationalize every moment. Direct experience is simple, but not easy. The habit of over-intellectualizing is deeply conditioned. The mind constantly jumps to analysis because it believes that by thinking about something, it will gain control over it. But this is an illusion. Thinking about a wave does not make it stop moving. Thinking about fire does not make it warm. Thinking about happiness does not create happiness. Experience cannot be replaced by thought. A common example of this is seen in emotions. When sadness arises, the mind does not simply allow it to be felt. Instead, it tries to explain it, asking why it is there, searching for its cause, trying to justify or resist it. But the more sadness is analyzed, the longer it lingers. The more it is explained, the heavier it becomes. If sadness were simply allowed to be felt without resistance or interpretation, it would rise and fall naturally. But the mind refuses to let it move through. It holds on to it, feeding it more thoughts, keeping it alive far longer than necessary. The same applies to happiness. Instead of fully experiencing moments of joy, the mind immediately begins evaluating them. It wonders if the happiness will last, if something will go wrong, if this moment is as good as past moments. It compares, it judges, it questions, and in doing so, it diminishes the happiness itself. Direct experience allows joy to be felt without interference. It removes the mental noise that waters down the richness of life. Another example is relationships. Instead of being present with another person, the mind is often lost in thought. It interprets their words, anticipates their reactions, constructs imaginary conversations. it is rarely fully engaged. This is why many people feel disconnected, even when surrounded by others. They are present physically, but absent mentally. Direct experience means truly listening, not just waiting to respond. It means seeing another person as they are, rather than as the mind projects them to be. Buddhism emphasizes direct experience because it leads to a deeper understanding than analysis ever could. There is a famous Zen teaching: do not seek the truth, only stop cherishing opinions. This points to the fact that truth is not something to be figured out, it is something to be lived. The more the mind tries to label reality, the further it moves from reality itself. Overthinking is often mistaken for wisdom, but true wisdom does not come from endless thought. It comes from direct contact with life. A person who thinks too much about swimming will never learn how to swim. A person who studies music but never plays an instrument will never understand music. A person who analyzes love but never allows themselves to feel vulnerable will never know love. There is no substitute for experience. This does not mean thinking has no place. Thought is a valuable tool when used appropriately, but when it becomes the primary way of engaging with life, it creates distance rather than connection. The goal is not to eliminate thinking, but to know when it is useful and when it is unnecessary. Direct experience is what brings depth to life, not the stories the mind creates about it. Many people spend more time thinking about their lives than actually living them. They are caught in mental loops, endlessly replaying past events, imagining future scenarios, judging and interpreting every moment. But when thought is set aside, even briefly, something shifts. There is a direct connection to what is happening. There is a raw, unfiltered experience of reality, and in that space there is a depth of presence that no amount of thinking can replicate. Buddhism teaches mindfulness as a way to return to direct experience. By bringing full attention to the present, the mind stops wandering in endless thought. Eating is just eating. Walking is just walking. Feeling is just feeling. This does not mean ignoring thoughts, but not allowing them to dominate every moment. It means engaging with life directly rather than living through mental projections. One of the greatest misconceptions is that life is something to be figured out. But life is not a puzzle. It is not an intellectual problem that needs solving. It is something to be felt, to be engaged with, to be experienced fully. The more the mind seeks to understand it through analysis, the more it complicates it. The more it seeks to explain it, the further it moves from it. Direct experience does not require special knowledge. It does not require years of study or complex philosophy. It is always available. It is found in the small moments, in the quiet awareness of what is happening right now. A child does not need to analyze play in order to enjoy it. A musician does not need to think about every note in order to feel the music. A person does not need to understand happiness in order to experience it. Overthinking distracts from the simplicity of life. It turns everything into a mental exercise, making even joyful moments feel heavy. But stepping out of thought, even for a short time, reveals something profound. Life is not as complicated as the mind makes it seem. When thoughts settle, reality is seen as it is. There is no need to judge, label, or explain. There is only this moment, fully lived, fully experienced. Returning to direct experience is the key to ending unnecessary mental suffering. It is not about rejecting thought, but recognizing when it becomes a barrier. It is about stepping out of analysis and into awareness. The mind will always try to interpret life, but life does not need interpretation. It only needs to be lived. And in living fully, there is a depth of peace and clarity that no amount of thinking could ever provide. Thought is only useful when it allows direct engagement with life, but too often the mind does not allow things to flow. It holds on. It grasps onto memories, emotions, beliefs, and identities, refusing to let them go even when they no longer serve a purpose. The same thought patterns appear again and again, not because they are relevant, but because the mind is unwilling to release them. This clinging is what keeps suffering alive. It is not just the presence of thoughts that causes distress, but the attachment to them, the belief that they must be held onto, preserved, or constantly revisited. Buddhism teaches that attachment is at the root of all suffering, and one of the deepest attachments is the attachment to thoughts. People hold on to ideas about themselves, about others, about the past, about the future, and even about the way life should be. These mental constructs become fixed, creating a false sense of stability. But nothing in life is permanent, and when reality does not align with these fixed ideas, suffering follows. The more rigidly the mind clings to its beliefs, expectations, and memories, the more painful it becomes when life inevitably changes. The law of impermanence states that nothing stays the same. Everything is in motion. Thoughts arise and pass. Emotions come and go. Experiences begin and end. People enter and leave life. The seasons change. The body ages. Circumstances shift. Yet, despite this truth, the mind resists. It treats thoughts as if they are absolute, as if they define reality permanently. But clinging to a thought does not make it true. Holding on to an old belief does not mean it remains relevant. The refusal to let go of outdated mental patterns is what keeps the mind in conflict. One of the strongest attachments is the attachment to identity. People develop ideas about who they are, and they defend these ideas even when they cause suffering. Someone who believes they are unworthy will unconsciously look for evidence to confirm this belief. Someone who identifies as a victim will continue to replay past hurts, reinforcing the feeling of being wronged. Someone who sees themselves as superior will reject any challenge to their self-image. These thought patterns do not arise because they are true, but because they have been repeated so often that they feel real. The mind, in its clinging, creates a false sense of permanence around them. The suffering caused by attachment to thoughts is most evident in the way people interact with the past. The mind replays memories, holding on to regrets, mistakes, and painful experiences. It refuses to release them, believing that revisiting them will somehow change what happened. But no amount of thought can alter the past. Clinging to it only deepens suffering. The same is true for positive memories. People grasp onto moments of happiness, trying to preserve them, longing for them to return, resisting the truth that those moments, like everything else, were temporary. The mind also clings to the future. It constructs expectations, creating rigid ideas about how life should unfold. When reality does not match these expectations, frustration and disappointment arise. This attachment to a specific outcome makes it impossible to flow with change. Instead of adapting, the mind resists. Instead of accepting, it fights against what is. This struggle is what creates suffering, not the event itself. Life does not cause pain. Attachment to a fixed idea of life does. Letting go of attachment to thoughts does not mean suppressing them. It means seeing them clearly, understanding that they are temporary, and allowing them to pass without grasping. A thought appears, but instead of clinging to it, there is recognition that it is just a thought, not reality. This simple shift removes its power. The thought arises, stays for a moment, and dissolves on its own. No resistance, no attachment, no suffering. Clinging to thoughts creates an illusion of control. The mind assumes that by holding on to certain ideas, it can make sense of life, predict the future, or prevent unwanted change. But control is an illusion. No matter how tightly the mind holds on, things continue to change. This is why attachment always leads to suffering. It is an attempt to resist the natural flow of life. The law of impermanence is not something to fear. It is not a loss, but a liberation. When there is no attachment, there is no suffering. When thoughts are allowed to pass, the mind becomes lighter. When expectations are released, life becomes easier. When identity is no longer rigid, there is freedom to grow and evolve. Everything that is clung to eventually becomes a burden. Holding on to resentment keeps pain alive. Clinging to opinions creates conflict. Attachment to success creates fear of failure. Grasping for certainty creates anxiety. Every thought that is held onto unnecessarily becomes a source of suffering. The only way to be free is to let go. Letting go does not mean indifference. It does not mean avoiding responsibility or not caring. It means engaging with life fully while understanding that nothing is permanent. It means experiencing emotions without becoming trapped in them. It means having goals without being attached to the outcome. It means loving deeply without trying to possess or control. It means allowing things to come and go without resistance. One of the most common fears about impermanence is the belief that letting go of attachment means losing what is meaningful. But the opposite is true. When attachment is removed, experiences become richer. Love without attachment is deeper because it is not based on fear of loss. Joy without attachment is fuller because it is not overshadowed by worry. Peace without attachment is real because it does not depend on external conditions. Buddhism teaches mindfulness as a way to recognize impermanence directly. By observing thoughts as they arise and pass, it becomes clear that they have no lasting substance. They appear like waves in the ocean, rising, forming, and dissolving. There is no need to grasp at them. There is no need to resist them. Simply watching them come and go reveals their transient nature. Attachment to thoughts often arises because of identification. The mind believes that certain thoughts define who a person is, but thoughts are not the self. They are temporary mental events, not fixed truths. Recognizing this dissolves the illusion of permanence. The thought may return, but it is no longer something to fight against or cling to. It is just another passing phenomenon. Impermanence is often misunderstood as something negative, but it is the very thing that makes growth possible. If nothing changed, there would be no learning, no healing, no transformation. The pain that feels unbearable today will soften with time. The uncertainty that creates anxiety now will fade. The mind that is restless today will become still. Nothing stays the same, and that is what allows suffering to end. Accepting impermanence means no longer fearing change. It means understanding that loss is not the end, but a transition. It means seeing that no moment, no feeling, no situation is final. This does not make life meaningless. It makes it precious. When something is known to be temporary, it is appreciated fully while it is here, without the need to cling. Resistance to impermanence comes from fear, but fear itself is impermanent. The emotions that feel overwhelming are not permanent. The doubts that seem so strong will not last. Every difficulty, every struggle, every challenge eventually passes. What remains is not the thought, not the fear, not the attachment, but the awareness that sees it all come and go. Practicing non-attachment is not about forcing the mind to let go. It is about seeing clearly that there is nothing to hold on to. It is about realizing that thoughts, emotions, and circumstances are like flowing water, always moving, never fixed. The more this is seen directly, the more natural it becomes to stop clinging. Life becomes lighter when thoughts are not treated as absolute. The mind becomes quieter when it no longer insists on holding on to every passing idea. Suffering lessens when there is no longer resistance to change. This is the freedom that Buddhism points to, not the elimination of thoughts, but the end of attachment to them. To live without unnecessary suffering, the only thing that must be done is to let go of what is already leaving. There is nothing to force, nothing to chase, nothing to grasp, just the simple understanding that everything moves, everything changes, and everything is already on its way to becoming something else. And when that is fully understood, the mind is free. The mind becomes lighter when there is no longer an attachment to thoughts, but something even deeper still holds on, the self. Beneath every lingering thought, every fear, every anxiety, and every desire is a silent belief that fuels overthinking. It is the belief in a fixed identity, the idea that there is a solid, unchanging me that must be preserved, defended, and perfected. This illusion is what keeps the mind restless. It is why people replay conversations, justify their actions, seek validation, and fear failure. Overthinking is not just about external worries. At its core, it is an attempt to protect the fragile idea of self. Buddhism challenges this illusion with a radical truth. There is no permanent self to protect. What is called me is not a single, unchanging entity, but a collection of shifting thoughts, emotions, and experiences. The mind assumes that there is a central figure holding everything together, but when it is examined closely, nothing solid can be found. There is no fixed identity, only a stream of changing sensations and perceptions. This is the teaching of anatta, the doctrine of no self, and it is the key to dissolving the endless mental chatter that dominates the mind. The idea of self is the foundation of overthinking. It is why people ruminate over past mistakes, fearing that they define who they are. It is why they obsess over their image, worrying about how they are perceived. It is why they resist change, because it threatens the stability of their identity. Every anxious thought can be traced back to a fear of losing something tied to the self: status, reputation, success, relationships, control. The ego clings to these things because it believes they are part of what makes up me. When anything threatens them, the mind reacts with endless thought, trying to protect and reinforce what it believes must not be lost. But the self that is being protected does not exist in the way the mind assumes. It is not a solid entity, but a construct held together by memory and thought. The person who exists today is not the same person who existed 5 years ago. Thoughts have changed, emotions have shifted, experiences have reshaped perspectives. The self is fluid, yet the mind tries to hold on to it as if it is fixed. This resistance is what fuels mental suffering. Overthinking arises when the ego tries to control how it is perceived. People worry about what others think of them, not because it changes anything tangible, but because it threatens their self-image. They replay social interactions, analyzing every word, fearing that they might have said something wrong. They dwell on criticism, not because it physically harms them, but because it disrupts their sense of identity. They struggle with self-doubt, not because they lack ability, but because they are afraid of failing in a way that would damage their ego. This is why detaching from the self is the ultimate solution to overthinking. When there is no longer an obsession with preserving an image, thoughts lose their intensity. Criticism no longer feels like an attack. because there is no rigid self to defend. Failures do not cause suffering because there is no identity at risk. The need for external validation disappears because there is no longer a constructed ego that depends on approval. The mind becomes quiet because there is nothing left to prove. The ego thrives on attachment. It builds itself through labels and identifications, clinging to roles, achievements, and personal narratives. It says, I am successful, I am intelligent, I am kind, I am strong. These seem harmless, but they create a mental prison. The moment identity is tied to something external, overthinking is inevitable. If someone believes they are intelligent, they will fear situations where they might appear ignorant. If they believe they are successful, they will obsess over failure. If they believe they are kind, they will be disturbed by moments when they act selfishly. The mind becomes trapped in a constant effort to maintain an image, afraid of anything that contradicts it. This illusion extends into every aspect of life. People attach to their possessions because they feel like extensions of the self. They attach to their opinions because changing them feels like losing part of their identity. They attach to relationships because they provide a sense of stability for the self. Every attachment feeds the ego, and every loss triggers overthinking as the mind scrambles to protect its fragile sense of identity. Dissolving the illusion of self does not mean becoming passive or indifferent. It means moving through life without the weight of defending an identity. It means engaging fully in the present, without the mental baggage of preserving a reputation or upholding a self-image. It means responding to life instead of reacting to threats against the ego, without the pressure of constantly reinforcing an idea of who I am. Thoughts become fewer, lighter, and less intrusive. One of the most direct ways to weaken the ego is through deep self-inquiry. Instead of assuming that the self is real, it can be questioned. When the thought arises, I am afraid of failure, it can be examined. Who's afraid? Where is this I that is afraid? When the mind searches for a solid self, it finds nothing but shifting thoughts, changing emotions, and passing sensations. The fear of failure does not belong to a fixed self. It is just another temporary mental state. When this is seen clearly, the fear loses its grip. The same process can be applied to any identity-based thought. If the mind says, I must succeed to be worthy, the question arises, who is this I that needs success? Where is it located? What happens when success is removed? The more these questions are asked, the more the illusion of self begins to dissolve. The mental structures that once seemed so solid begin to weaken. Overthinking fades because there is no longer an identity that needs protecting. Meditation is one of the most effective ways to experience the absence of self. In deep meditation, the mind quiets, and something profound becomes clear. Thoughts come and go, but there is no fixed I controlling them. Sensations arise and fade, but there is no central self experiencing them. Everything happens spontaneously, without a separate entity managing it. The body breathes on its own. Thoughts appear without permission. Emotions shift without effort. The belief in a personal, separate self starts to seem unnecessary. This realization brings an incredible sense of freedom. The mind no longer needs to construct an image because there is nothing to uphold. Fear of judgment disappears because there is no self that can be diminished. The burden of comparison fades because there is no fixed identity to measure against others. Overthinking stops because the entire system that fueled it, the need to protect, define, and defend a self falls away. Letting go of the self does not mean life becomes meaningless. In fact, it makes life more vivid. Without the ego, there is nothing separating awareness from experience. Joy is fully felt, without the need to hold on to it. Love is expressed freely, without the fear of losing it. Challenges are faced without resistance, because there is no identity to protect. The mind no longer runs in circles trying to secure something that never existed in the first place. The more this is practiced, the lighter life becomes. There is no need to fight against thoughts or force them to stop. They lose their power naturally when there is nothing for them to cling to. The mind no longer wastes energy defending an image, proving something to others, or replaying mistakes. It simply moves with life, without resistance, without struggle. Buddhism teaches that the greatest freedom is the freedom from self. The moment identity dissolves, all the suffering attached to it dissolves as well. There is no longer a fragile me at the center of every thought. There is no longer a fear of being wrong, failing, or being judged. There is only the present, unfolding without mental interference. Overthinking thrives on the illusion of self, but the truth is, there is no self to protect. The thoughts that once seemed overwhelming are seen for what they are, passing events, no different from clouds in the sky. The endless inner dialogue that once seemed so important is revealed to be just noise. When the ego is no longer fed, the mind becomes silent, and in that silence, true peace is found. When the illusion of self dissolves, the weight of overthinking begins to fall away. But even when the ego weakens, something deeper remains, a persistent undercurrent of suffering. Thoughts still arise, worries still appear. The mind still clings to old patterns, as if it cannot help but return to the same loops of anxiety, regret, and doubt. This is not a failure of awareness. It is simply the nature of the mind when it is left untrained. Buddhism offers a clear explanation for why this happens. The First Noble Truth states that suffering is an unavoidable part of existence. This suffering is not only physical pain or external hardship, it is also the internal suffering created by the mind itself. Overthinking is one of its most common forms. The mind creates its own suffering by spinning in endless circles, revisiting past wounds, worrying about future losses, and resisting what already is. The First Noble Truth does not say that suffering should be feared. It simply points out that it exists, and that understanding its nature is the first step to being free from it. Overthinking is a form of suffering because it places the mind in a state of resistance. A thought arises, but instead of letting it pass, the mind clings to it, trying to solve it, control it, or push it away. This resistance creates tension. Instead of allowing emotions to move through naturally, overthinking traps them, stretching them beyond their natural lifespan. Sadness is no longer a passing emotion. It becomes a persistent mental burden. Fear is no longer a momentary signal. It becomes an unending cycle of worst-case scenarios. Doubt is no longer a moment of reflection. It becomes an identity that shapes every decision. The mind suffers not because thoughts appear, but because it does not know how to let them go. It treats every passing worry as something that must be resolved. It tries to create certainty in a world that is uncertain. It looks for permanence where none exists. This is why overthinking feels exhausting. It is a fight against reality. The First Noble Truth teaches that suffering is caused by attachment and resistance. When the mind clings to something, suffering follows. When it resists what is happening, suffering intensifies. The only way out is to stop fighting against the nature of life itself. One of the strongest causes of overthinking is the desire for control. The mind believes that if it can just think enough, plan enough, or analyze enough, it can prevent bad things from happening. But suffering is not something that can be avoided through mental effort. No amount of thinking can stop change. No amount of worry can prevent loss. No amount of analysis can guarantee happiness. The more the mind tries to control, the more it suffers, because life does not conform to mental expectations. Breaking free from overthinking begins with recognizing that suffering is not caused by external events, but by the mind's reaction to them. Two people can face the same situation, yet one will suffer deeply while the other remains calm. The difference is not in the event itself, but in how it is processed. One person resists, holding on to what they wish was different. The other accepts, adapting to what is. The same principle applies to thoughts. A mind that clings to thoughts will suffer, but a mind that allows thoughts to come and go remains at peace. Buddhism teaches that suffering is not a punishment, it is a teacher. Every moment of overthinking is an opportunity to see where the mind is still attached. Every loop of anxious thought reveals a hidden fear that has not been faced. Every moment of frustration points to an expectation that has not been released. Instead of treating suffering as something to escape, it can be used as a guide. Where there is suffering, there is attachment. And where there's attachment, there is an opportunity for freedom. Most people believe that suffering comes from outside themselves. They blame circumstances, other people, or the past. But the real cause of suffering is internal. The situation may be difficult, but it is the mind's resistance to it that creates suffering. This is why two people can experience the same loss, yet one will be consumed by it while the other finds peace. It is not the event itself, but the interpretation of it, the attachment to it, and the mental stories built around it that determine the depth of suffering. Overthinking is the mind's attempt to avoid suffering, but in doing so, it creates more of it. The more the mind fixates, the heavier the burden becomes. The more it tries to solve every problem before it happens, the more anxious it becomes. The more it searches for a way to prevent discomfort, the more trapped it feels. The mind, in its effort to protect itself, unknowingly deepens its own suffering. One of the greatest misconceptions is that suffering must be eliminated before peace can be found. But the Buddhist path does not promise a life free of suffering. It promises freedom from the attachment to suffering. Thoughts will still appear. Loss will still happen. Change will still come. But when the mind no longer clings, suffering loses its grip. The storms of life come and go, but they do not shake the mind that is rooted in awareness. The mind is conditioned to believe that thinking more will lead to clarity, but often it only creates more confusion. The more thoughts are examined, the more tangled they become. The more problems are analyzed, the more they multiply. The mind does not need more thought. It needs space. It does not need more control. It needs surrender. When space is given between thoughts, suffering weakens. When the need for control is dropped, freedom begins. Accepting suffering does not mean becoming passive or giving up. It means understanding that pain is part of life, but the mental suffering added on top of it is optional. A loss may bring sadness, but the endless thoughts of, "This should not have happened," are what turn sadness into suffering. A failure may bring disappointment, but the belief that "I am a failure" is what turns disappointment into self-doubt. The event itself is never as painful as the mind's interpretation of it. The mind creates suffering by turning temporary moments into permanent problems. It takes a passing emotion and attaches a story to it. making it last far longer than necessary. It takes a fleeting worry and expands it into an all-consuming fear. It takes a single mistake and stretches it into an identity. But when impermanence is truly understood, these mental constructions lose their power. A thought is just a thought. A feeling is just a feeling. A problem is just a moment that will pass. Breaking free from overthinking is not about getting rid of thoughts. It is about changing the relationship to them. When suffering arises, instead of getting lost in the mental story around it, it can simply be observed. Instead of identifying with every emotion, it can be allowed to pass naturally. Instead of clinging to every worry, it can be seen as just another temporary mental event. Meditation is one of the most powerful ways to see this directly. In stillness, the mind's patterns become clear. The same worries arise again and again. The same attachments show up repeatedly. But when these patterns are observed without resistance, they begin to lose their intensity. The thoughts that once seemed overwhelming are revealed to be nothing more than passing mental habits. They arise, they stay for a moment, and then they dissolve, just like everything else. Suffering weakens the moment it is no longer resisted. Overthinking fades the moment it is no longer fed. When the mind stops trying to escape discomfort and simply observes it, something shifts. The suffering doesn't control anymore. The thoughts do not consume anymore. There is space, awareness, and the realization that none of it is permanent. The first noble truth does not say that life is only suffering. It says that suffering exists, and that understanding it is the first step toward freedom. Overthinking is a form of suffering, but it is not a life sentence. It is a habit, a conditioned pattern, a misunderstanding that can be undone. And the key to undoing it is not more thought, not more control, but less attachment. When suffering is seen for what it is, it loses its power. When overthinking is no longer mistaken for wisdom, it fades. When the mind stops clinging to what has already passed or what has not yet happened, it finds something rare: peace, right here, in the only place it has ever existed. When the mind releases its grip on suffering, a new kind of space emerges. But space alone is not enough. Without direction, the mind will find ways to slip back into its old patterns, drifting from thought to thought, grasping for stimulation, creating problems where none exist. Even when suffering is understood, the habit of scattered attention remains. The mind, untrained, constantly shifts, seeking more, moving faster, never satisfied. This restlessness is what fuels overthinking, keeping the mind in a state of constant agitation. Buddhism teaches that presence is the antidote, not just occasional mindfulness, but deep, sustained attention to the present moment. The modern mind is conditioned for distraction. Multitasking is celebrated, rapid thinking is rewarded, and constant stimulation is expected. But a mind that is always divided is a mind that is never at peace. Multitasking does not create efficiency, it creates fragmentation. The more the mind is scattered, the harder it becomes to focus, the more thoughts pile up, and the more exhausting life feels. Single tasking is a radical shift. It means doing one thing at a time, fully, with complete attention. It is a practice of presence, a way of rewiring the brain to move slower, deeper, and with more clarity. It is not just about productivity, it is about retraining the mind to break free from the cycle of mental overdrive. A single moment, fully experienced, is more powerful than 1,000 moments spent half aware. The restless mind resists this. It thrives on jumping between tasks, switching from one thought to another, feeling productive but never truly engaged. But this constant switching comes at a cost. Studies in neuroscience confirm what Buddhist monks have practiced for centuries. Each time the mind shifts from one task to another, it loses efficiency, wastes energy, and creates more mental fatigue. What feels like getting more done is actually a slow erosion of clarity, an addiction to movement that prevents true understanding. Training the mind to stay present through single tasking is not just about focus. It is about developing a way of being that transforms how life is experienced. It slows down the racing thoughts that fuel anxiety. It eliminates the need to constantly check, refresh, and jump between activities. It deepens attention, creating a state of mind that is calm, deliberate, and fully engaged. One of the simplest but most powerful aspects of Buddhist practice is the emphasis on doing each action with full awareness. Walking is just walking. Eating is just eating. Speaking is just speaking. When the mind is fully absorbed in a single action, there is no space for unnecessary thought. There is no need to replay past mistakes or anticipate future problems. There is only this moment, and in this moment, there is no overthinking, only presence. The habit of scattered attention is deeply ingrained. From an early age, people are trained to divide their focus. They watch television while eating, scroll through their phones while talking, jump between tasks while working. The mind learns that being fully present is not necessary, but this divided attention comes at a cost. It weakens concentration, makes tasks take longer, and drains mental energy. Instead of doing one thing well, everything is done with half awareness, and this half awareness becomes the default state of mind. Single tasking rewires the brain. Each time full attention is given to one task, the ability to focus strengthens. The mind becomes more disciplined, more efficient, and more capable of deep thought. Thoughts no longer compete for attention, and the overwhelming flood of mental noise begins to quiet. The effort to control thoughts becomes unnecessary because when full attention is given to the present, unnecessary thoughts do not arise in the first place. In Buddhist monasteries, simple tasks become training grounds for presence. Sweeping the floor is not a chore, it is a meditation. Eating a meal is not a distraction, it is a practice in mindfulness. Speaking is done with full awareness, without rushing, without interrupting. Every action becomes an opportunity to refine the mind, to deepen focus, to cultivate awareness. The modern world sees these actions as insignificant, something to be done quickly while thinking about something else. But in the search for speed, depth is lost. A task done with full attention is effortless, while a task done with a distracted mind feels draining. One of the greatest sources of stress in modern life is the feeling of always being behind, always having too much to do. But this stress does not come from the tasks themselves. It comes from the mind's habit of holding all tasks at once. When multiple demands are kept in mind at the same time, the brain perceives them as immediate threats, creating tension, anxiety, and the feeling of being overwhelmed. But when only one task is held in awareness, the stress disappears. The mind is no longer burdened by everything that must be done. It is free to focus, to act, to complete each moment without distraction. Single tasking is not just about external tasks. It applies to thought itself. The mind, left untrained, jumps from one thought to another, never finishing one before starting the next. This creates chaos, a constant mental traffic jam where no idea is fully explored, no insight is fully realized. But when the mind learns to focus on one thought at a time, it moves with clarity. It sees things as they are, without distortion, without confusion. Overthinking cannot survive in a mind trained in single tasking. When the mind is fully engaged in what it is doing, unnecessary thoughts do not arise. There is no space for them. A mind that is trained to give full attention does not need to silence thoughts. They simply do not appear in the same way. Worry fades because the mind is absorbed in the present. Regret disappears because the focus is on what is happening now. There is no energy left for doubt, self-criticism, or imaginary fears. Training the mind to single task does not mean forcing focus. It is not about discipline in the sense of struggle. It is about letting go of the need to be everywhere at once, to do everything at once, to think about everything at once. It is about allowing the mind to rest in one place, fully, without resistance. Single tasking is also a form of deep appreciation. When the mind is scattered, everything is rushed, everything is shallow. Food is eaten without tasting it. Conversations happen without being heard. Work is done without care. But when full attention is given, even the simplest actions become meaningful. The mind does not seek more because it is fully engaged with what is already happening. Technology has made distraction the default state. Information is endless, notifications are constant, and the habit of checking, switching, and multitasking is deeply embedded. But this is not a natural state for the mind. The more it is trained in single tasking, the more it recognizes that deep presence is far more satisfying than scattered attention. One of the easiest ways to begin training the mind in single tasking is through daily rituals. Drinking a cup of tea without distraction, feeling the warmth, noticing the taste, walking without checking a phone, being fully aware of each step, listening to someone speak without planning a response, absorbing their words completely. These small practices begin to shift the way the mind operates. They break the habit of divided attention and replace it with presence. Single tasking is not about doing less. It is about being fully engaged with what is already being done. It is not about forcing focus. It is about letting go of the habit of scattering attention. It is not about productivity. It's about peace. When the mind is trained to stay with one thing at a time, life slows down. Thoughts slow down. The constant pressure to do more, think more, and be more fades. And in that space, a deep, effortless clarity emerges. This is why the greatest Buddhist teachers, despite their wisdom, live simple lives. They do not rush. They do not divide their attention. They do not seek more stimulation. They give their full presence to each moment, and in doing so, they find something that most never do: freedom from the restless mind. The path to ending overthinking is not about controlling thoughts, but changing the way the mind engages with life. Single tasking is not just a technique. It is a way of living. It is a shift from scattered distraction to deep awareness, from mental exhaustion to effortless presence, from chaos to clarity. And when the mind is trained in this way, peace is no longer something that must be sought. It is something that arises naturally in every moment that is fully lived. When the mind learns to focus on one thing at a time, distractions lose their grip and clarity begins to emerge. But even as focus deepens, another challenge arises: what to do with thoughts themselves. Some believe the only way to find peace is to eliminate thoughts completely, suppressing them until the mind is silent. Others assume that every thought must be indulged, analyzed, and followed wherever it leads. Both approaches create suffering. Suppression creates tension, an internal battle that makes thoughts return even stronger. Overindulgence leads to endless mental loops, making clarity impossible. The mind swings between these two extremes, never finding balance. Buddhism offers another way, the middle way. Instead of rejecting thoughts or being consumed by them, it teaches a balanced approach. Thoughts arise naturally, but they do not need to be controlled or entertained. They can be observed without force, without attachment, without resistance. This balance is what allows the mind to remain clear, neither overwhelmed by thoughts nor rigidly suppressing them. It is not about thinking more or thinking less. It is about thinking wisely. One of the most common mistakes people make when trying to quiet the mind is believing that peace comes from eliminating thoughts entirely. They fight against thinking, trying to silence the mind through sheer effort. But this only creates more tension. The harder thoughts are pushed away, the stronger they become. The mind is not designed to be empty. Even the most experienced meditators do not achieve a mind free of thought. They cultivate a mind that is undisturbed by thought. This distinction is crucial. Peace does not come from suppression. It comes from non-attachment. At the same time, indulging in every thought is just as harmful. When every idea, worry, or memory is followed, the mind becomes chaotic. It jumps from one thing to another, losing itself in stories, fears, and imagined problems. Overindulgence in thought makes life feel overwhelming, as the mind constantly expands small concerns into massive ones. This is why some people feel exhausted despite doing nothing physically demanding. Their energy is spent in mental overactivity, in following unnecessary thoughts, in believing every story the mind creates. The middle way of thought is a practice of balance. It means allowing thoughts to come and go without force. Instead of pushing them away, they are acknowledged and left to pass. Instead of feeding them with endless attention, they are simply observed. This is what creates true mental freedom. When the mind is neither suppressing nor indulging, thoughts lose their power. They are no longer seen as problems to be solved, but as passing waves in the ocean of awareness. A key part of this practice is recognizing that not all thoughts are useful. The mind produces thousands of thoughts every day, but most of them serve no real purpose. They are repetitive, reactive, or completely unnecessary. Some thoughts are insights, some are warnings, but many are just mental noise. The problem arises when every thought is treated as equally important. The middle way teaches discernment, the ability to recognize which thoughts deserve attention and which do not. This discernment is what prevents the two extremes. Without it, the mind either tries to suppress everything, fearing thoughts themselves, or it becomes lost in endless overthinking. Discernment allows thoughts to be seen clearly, without fear, without clinging. A thought about the past may arise, but instead of analyzing it endlessly, it is acknowledged and released. A worry about the future appears, but instead of feeding it with more anxiety, it is left alone. This is not suppression, it is wisdom. The habit of suppressing thoughts often comes from fear. People assume that if they allow certain thoughts, they will lose control. They believe that unwanted thoughts must be forced away, or else they will take over. But thoughts only have power when they are resisted. When they are met with non-attachment, they fade on their own. Suppression creates an internal battle, a state of conflict that drains energy and creates more suffering. The middle way dissolves this battle by removing the need to fight at all. Indulgence in thought, on the other hand, comes from a misunderstanding. People believe that by thinking more, they will find certainty, clarity, or control. But the mind does not work this way. The more thoughts are followed, the more tangled they become. The search for certainty only creates more doubt. The attempt to control thoughts only leads to more chaos. The mind seeks relief through thinking, but relief is only found in letting go. The middle way is practiced through awareness. Instead of reacting to every thought, there is observation. Instead of suppressing thoughts, there is patience. When an emotion arises, it is not pushed away, nor is it exaggerated. It's simply experienced as it is. This creates a sense of calm that's not dependent on the absence of thoughts, but on the ability to remain undisturbed by them. Buddhist teachings often use the metaphor of the sky and clouds. The mind is the sky, vast and open. Thoughts are clouds, passing through, changing shape, appearing and disappearing. Some are dark, some are light, but none of them affect the sky itself. The sky does not try to hold on to clouds, nor does it try to push them away. It allows them to pass. This is the essence of the middle way of thought. The mind is not disturbed by what comes and goes. It remains as it is, clear and spacious. This approach to thought is not something that happens instantly. It is a practice, a gradual retraining of the mind. At first, there is the impulse to react, to suppress, to indulge. But with continued awareness, these impulses weaken. The mind starts to recognize that thoughts are not threats, that they do not need to be controlled. They appear, they pass, and nothing is lost. One of the most effective ways to develop this balance is through meditation. Sitting in stillness, watching the mind, seeing thoughts arise and dissolve without interference. This practice directly reveals the nature of thought. Instead of trying to change thoughts, there is the simple act of witnessing them. Over time, the grip of thought weakens. The need to react disappears. The extremes of indulgence and suppression are replaced with effortless awareness. The middle way of thought also transforms daily life. Conversations become more present because the mind is not lost in overanalysis. Work becomes more focused because the mind is not scattered between tasks. Emotions are felt deeply, but do not overwhelm, because they are not resisted or over-examined. Life itself becomes clearer, because the mind is no longer clouded by excessive thought. The greatest benefit of this practice is freedom. The mind is no longer a battlefield, no longer a place of struggle. There is no longer the burden of controlling every thought, nor the exhaustion of following every mental story. There is only clarity, balance, and a deep sense of inner peace. This is why the middle way is central to Buddhist teachings. It applies not only to thoughts, but to all aspects of life. Extreme control leads to suffering. Extreme indulgence leads to suffering. But balance creates ease. A mind that follows this path does not need to escape thought, nor does it need to cling to it. It does not seek stillness through force, nor does it drown in unnecessary mental activity. It simply remains present, aware, and at peace. And when this balance is found, the restlessness of overthinking disappears, not because thoughts have stopped, but because they no longer disturb the vast, open awareness that holds them all. When the mind learns to balance thought, neither indulging nor suppressing, it begins to see something deeper. Thoughts themselves are not the problem. It is what the mind does with them that causes suffering. A single thought is harmless, a flicker of mental activity. But the mind rarely leaves thoughts as they are. It turns them into stories. It takes a passing concern and expands it into a full narrative of fear and failure. It takes a moment of discomfort and builds an identity around it. Instead of experiencing life directly, the mind overlays it with interpretations, assumptions, and conclusions that create unnecessary suffering. Buddhism teaches that much of human misery comes not from external events, but from the mind's habit of storytelling. The event itself is never as painful as the story built around it. A simple comment from someone is replayed in the mind, dissected, exaggerated, and turned into evidence of rejection. A moment of embarrassment is stretched into a narrative of personal inadequacy. A minor setback is expanded into a prediction of complete failure. The mind does not let things remain small. It builds, it expands, it creates stories that have little to do with reality. The more these stories are believed, the more they shape perception. A thought of doubt turns into a full story of being incapable. A brief worry becomes a prophecy of disaster. A single event in the past is relived so many times that it becomes a defining part of identity. The problem is not that thoughts arise. It is that they are transformed into complex stories that are mistaken for truth. These mental narratives create an artificial version of reality, one that is filled with suffering, not because of what is happening, but because of what is being added to it. Dropping the story means learning to see thoughts as they are, fleeting, insubstantial, and often unnecessary. It is the recognition that thoughts do not need to be built upon, that they do not need to be turned into narratives. A thought of worry can be left as a thought of worry. It does not need to become a mental movie of catastrophe. A thought of sadness can arise and dissolve without the mind creating an entire explanation for it. By dropping the story, thought is left in its pure form, just a passing mental event, no different from a cloud in the sky. The mind clings to stories because they provide a sense of identity. People do not just experience emotions, they attach narratives to them that reinforce their self-image. Someone who has failed at something does not just see it as an event, they create a story that they are a failure. Someone who experiences rejection does not just feel hurt in the moment, they construct a lifelong narrative of being unwanted. These stories shape behavior, reinforce limiting beliefs, and create a self that feels trapped in endless overthinking. Buddhism teaches that identity itself is a story. The self is not a fixed thing, but a collection of narratives pieced together from memory and thought. The moment these narratives are questioned, their power weakens. If the story of being incapable is dropped, what remains? If the story of being unworthy is released, what is left? Without stories, there is only direct experience. Life as it is, not as the mind has framed it. One of the greatest sources of mental suffering is the belief that stories are necessary. The mind assumes that analyzing, explaining, and narrating every thought will lead to understanding, but it only leads to entrapment. The deeper the story goes, the harder it becomes to see life clearly. Each added layer of thought moves further away from direct experience. The truth is never found in the mind's explanations. It is found in what is, before the story is created. Breaking the habit of storytelling begins with awareness. The moment a thought arises, there is a choice, to let it pass or to build on it. If it is left alone, it dissolves naturally. If it is fed with more thought, it becomes a story. Most suffering is self-created, built through repeated mental construction. When this is seen directly, the need to build stories begins to fade. The strongest stories are the ones tied to the past. The mind replays old wounds, adding meaning, interpretation, and conclusions that were never part of the original experience. A single painful moment is relived so many times that it becomes a lifelong burden. The story is not just a memory, it is kept alive through constant mental reinforcement. But the past is gone. The only thing that keeps it alive is the mind's attachment to the story about it. Dropping the story does not mean ignoring the past. It means releasing the unnecessary weight attached to it. The event happened, but the suffering comes from the interpretation added to it. The past is not what continues to cause pain. It is the story that has been told about it again and again. The moment that story is dropped, the suffering dissolves. This applies equally to the future. Worry is nothing more than storytelling about what has not yet happened. The mind creates scenarios, predicting disaster, failure, or rejection before anything has even occurred. But these are just mental constructions. The future does not exist as the mind imagines it. The story of what could go wrong is just that, a story. And like all stories, it can be dropped. Buddhist practice encourages direct experience as a way to break free from storytelling. Instead of analyzing emotions, they are felt fully, without mental commentary. Instead of explaining thoughts, they're observed in their raw form. Instead of interpreting events, they are experienced as they are. This direct engagement with life removes the need for excessive thought, making overthinking unnecessary. Meditation is one of the most powerful tools for breaking the habit of storytelling. Sitting in silence, watching the mind, it becomes clear how often it turns simple thoughts into elaborate narratives. A single worry appears, and before it is even recognized, the mind has already turned it into a complex prediction of failure. A single memory arises, and within moments, the mind has built an entire emotional story around it. But when these patterns are seen, they lose their grip. The mind realizes that thoughts do not need to be turned into anything. They can be left as they are. The more this is practiced, the quieter the mind becomes. Not because thoughts have stopped, but because they are no longer transformed into stories. A thought of anger appears, but it does not need to become a lifelong grudge. A moment of doubt arises, but it does not need to become a story of incompetence. The mind remains open, spacious, and free from the weight of unnecessary thought. Dropping the story is not about suppressing emotions. It is about removing the unnecessary suffering attached to them. Pain can exist without the additional suffering created by mental narratives. A moment of sadness can be experienced fully without turning into a belief about being broken. A moment of fear can pass through without turning into an identity of being weak. This is the difference between experiencing emotions and becoming trapped in them. The freedom that comes from dropping the story is immense. The mind no longer needs to carry every past mistake, every possible future problem, every imagined interpretation of what others think. Life becomes lighter, not because nothing happens, but because nothing is held onto unnecessarily. The mind is always searching for meaning, but not all meaning is necessary. Some things do not need explanation. Some thoughts do not need interpretation. Some moments do not need a story. When this is understood, the need for constant mental activity dissolves. The mind no longer needs to process everything because it trusts that life is already complete without additional commentary. This is why Buddhist teachings emphasize simplicity. The fewer stories the mind builds, the clearer life becomes. The less thought is added, the lighter the mind feels. The habit of storytelling does not end through force. It ends through seeing that stories are not needed. When the mind no longer turns every thought into a story, peace arises naturally, not because thoughts have stopped, but because they are no longer believed as absolute truth. A thought is just a thought, a passing event, an echo of the mind. And when that is fully seen, the need to hold on to stories disappears, leaving only presence, clarity, and the effortless freedom of a mind that no longer builds its own suffering. When the habit of storytelling fades, the mind becomes lighter. But in that newfound clarity, another truth emerges, one that has often been overlooked. Beneath the layers of overthinking, judgment, and endless mental loops, there is a voice that has been whispering all along. It is not the voice of wisdom or awareness, but the voice of self-criticism. It is the voice that repeats past mistakes, that questions worthiness, that turns every small misstep into a personal failure. Even when unnecessary narratives are dropped, this voice lingers. And unless it is understood, it keeps the cycle of overthinking alive. Buddhism teaches that the way the mind is treated determines its state. If it is met with harshness, it becomes tense. If it is constantly judged, it retreats into defensiveness. If it is filled with criticism, it learns to expect suffering, even in moments of peace. Overthinking does not only come from attachment to thoughts, it also comes from the way the mind reacts to itself. A mind that fears its own thoughts, that sees them as proof of failure, that turns every moment of doubt into a reason for shame, will never find stillness. But a mind met with compassion softens, relaxes, and becomes a place of refuge instead of a battlefield. Loving kindness, or metta in Buddhist teachings, is not just about extending kindness to others. It begins with the self. It is the practice of looking at the mind, not with frustration, not with judgment, but with the same warmth one would offer to a dear friend. The suffering of overthinking is not caused by thoughts alone, but by the way the mind punishes itself for having them. When a moment of doubt arises, instead of being met with understanding, it is met with self-criticism. When anxiety appears, instead of being acknowledged gently, it is pushed away with frustration. This inner resistance does not silence the mind, it amplifies its suffering. A harsh mind does not create clarity, it creates fear. It turns every thought into a battle, every mistake into a reason for self-hatred. It leaves no room for growth because it assumes that imperfection is failure. But this approach is based on misunderstanding. The mind was never meant to be controlled through force. It was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to be understood, accepted, and cared for, just like any other part of life. Buddhist compassion teaches that the way to quiet the mind is not by force, but by kindness. A child who is constantly scolded will become anxious, afraid to make mistakes. A mind that is constantly criticized does the same. It becomes defensive, reactive, caught in cycles of overanalysis, trying to avoid further punishment. But when the mind is met with understanding, it begins to trust itself. It no longer resists thoughts, no longer fights emotions, no longer fears imperfection. It finds peace, not through control, but through self-acceptance. One of the strongest sources of overthinking is the belief that the mind should be different than it is. People assume that if they were smarter, more disciplined, more enlightened, they would not have anxious thoughts. They believe that their mental struggles are proof of failure. But Buddhism teaches that the mind is not a problem to be fixed. It is an experience to be lived. Thoughts arise, emotions fluctuate, patterns come and go. None of this is a sign of failure. It is simply the nature of the mind. Compassion for the mind means releasing the need for it to be perfect. It means understanding that overthinking is not a personal flaw, but a habit formed over time. It means seeing that self-criticism does not help. It only deepens suffering. The mind is not an enemy to be conquered. It is a wounded part of the self that has been trying, in its own way, to keep things under control. Even the most destructive thought patterns started as an attempt to protect. Worry was meant to prepare for the future. Self-doubt was meant to avoid mistakes. Overanalysis was meant to find certainty. These patterns are misguided, but they were never meant to cause harm. This is why self-compassion is so powerful. The moment the mind is met with kindness instead of judgment, it stops resisting. It stops feeling the need to defend itself. It stops fighting against its own nature. Instead of fearing its own thoughts, it begins to trust that it can handle them. Instead of spiraling into shame, it allows itself to feel, to process, and to move forward without unnecessary suffering. Many people misunderstand self-compassion as weakness. They assume that being kind to the mind means allowing negative habits to continue. But the opposite is true. A harsh mind does not lead to growth. It leads to paralysis. When mistakes are met with shame, learning stops. When struggles are met with criticism, progress becomes impossible. But when the mind is met with understanding, it becomes willing to change. Not because it is forced, but because it feels safe enough to let go of what no longer serves it. The practice of metta is one of the most transformative ways to shift from overthinking to peace. It begins with the simple act of recognizing suffering and responding to it with kindness. Instead of resisting thoughts, they are acknowledged gently. Instead of punishing the mind for wandering, it is brought back with patience. Instead of feeding cycles of self-judgment, there is the quiet recognition that imperfection is part of being human. This practice extends beyond thought. It transforms how emotions are handled, how challenges are faced, how setbacks are processed. A mind trained in self-compassion no longer sees struggle as failure. It sees difficulty as a natural part of growth. It does not rush to judgment, does not punish itself for not having all the answers, does not spiral into shame. It simply acknowledges what is happening, meets it with understanding, and moves forward without unnecessary suffering. When self-compassion deepens, the need for overthinking dissolves. The mind no longer sees every challenge as a threat. It no longer reacts to every mistake with fear. It no longer holds on to the belief that constant thought is the only way to stay safe. It learns to trust itself. It learns to rest. It learns that it does not need to prove anything to be worthy of peace. Meditation is one of the most powerful ways to cultivate this shift. In stillness, the patterns of the mind become clear. The automatic self-criticism, the instinctive resistance, the way thoughts are treated with hostility instead of kindness. But in that awareness, a choice emerges. The choice to respond differently. The choice to meet each thought, each emotion, each moment of suffering with understanding instead of judgment. Over time, this response becomes a habit. And with this habit, the mind begins to heal. Compassion does not eliminate all struggles. It does not make the mind silent forever, but it changes the relationship with thought. A mind that is met with kindness no longer fears itself. It no longer turns every small difficulty into a crisis. It no longer punishes itself for simply being as it is. And in that space, the mind finds something it has been searching for all along. Not more control, not more certainty, but the quiet, effortless relief of finally being at peace with itself. When the mind is met with compassion, its grip loosens. The weight of self-criticism lightens, the inner battles weaken, and a new understanding begins to take shape. But even as kindness grows, another truth must be faced. Thoughts themselves are not as solid, reliable, or meaningful as they appear. The mind produces an endless stream of thoughts, yet most of them dissolve as quickly as they arise. Some repeat themselves, some contradict each other, some are based on fears that never come true. And yet, the habit of clinging remains. Even the most compassionate mind can still fall into the trap of believing every thought it encounters. This is where the Buddhist teaching of shunyata, or emptiness, reveals its wisdom. The nature of thought is emptiness. This does not mean that thoughts do not exist, but that they have no inherent substance. They arise, pass, and leave no trace unless the mind clings to them. They have no solid core, no ultimate truth, no lasting reality. And yet, most suffering arises from taking them too seriously. A single thought can shift the entire mood of the day. A passing worry can create hours of stress. A brief moment of self-doubt can lead to decisions based on fear instead of clarity. The problem is not that thoughts exist, it is that they are mistaken for reality. Buddhism teaches that thoughts are like reflections in water. They appear clear, vivid, even convincing, but they are not the things they represent. The mind creates images, concepts, and stories about reality, but these are not reality itself. A thought about the future is not the future. A memory is not the past itself, but a mental reconstruction. A fear of what might happen is not evidence that it will. But when thoughts are believed without question, they create an illusion of certainty that leads to suffering. Most people assume that if a thought appears, it must mean something. If a worry arises, it must be addressed. If an idea enters the mind, it must be pursued. But thoughts are not instructions. They are not prophecies. They are not commands. They are passing mental events, no different from sounds in the environment. A bird sings, a car passes, a thought appears. None of them require attachment. Yet, unlike external sounds, thoughts are mistaken for personal truth. The mind assumes, "This is my thought, so it must be important." But thoughts do not belong to anyone. They arise from conditioning, from past experiences, from subconscious activity. They are not the voice of wisdom. They are echoes of the mind's habits. Understanding the emptiness of thought does not mean rejecting all thinking. It means seeing thought for what it is, temporary, unreliable, and often unnecessary. This recognition creates space. Instead of getting caught in mental spirals, there is a natural release. Instead of reacting to every thought, there is patience. The urgency to solve every mental question fades. The pressure to analyze every feeling dissolves. The mind begins to see that most thoughts, if left alone, disappear on their own. One of the strongest illusions of thought is the belief that more thinking leads to more clarity. But the opposite is often true. The deeper thoughts are analyzed, the more tangled they become. The more a problem is thought about, the more complex it appears. The more emotions are dissected, the stronger they seem. Thought does not always resolve itself through more thought. Often, peace is found in stepping back, in allowing thoughts to rise and fall without interference. Shunyata is not a philosophy to be accepted intellectually. It is a reality to be experienced directly. In meditation, the emptiness of thought becomes clear. A thought arises, it stays for a moment, then it fades. If it is not grasped, it passes like a cloud in the sky. The mind may try to hold on to it, to examine it, to find meaning in it. But when thought is left alone, it vanishes, revealing its impermanent nature. The suffering that seemed attached to it also fades. It was never the thought itself that caused suffering, but the clinging to it. A common fear is that without attachment to thought, life will lose its direction. People believe that they need to grasp thoughts to stay in control, to make decisions, to plan, to understand. But clarity does not come from grasping, it comes from seeing. When thought is no longer mistaken for absolute truth, the mind operates with more precision, not less. It moves with ease instead of tension. It responds instead of reacting. It trusts that insight arises naturally when space is given. not when the mind forces conclusions. This is why some of the greatest wisdom arises in moments of stillness. When the mind is no longer straining to understand, clarity emerges on its own. When thought is given room to breathe, it settles naturally. This is not passivity. It is intelligence beyond effort. The mind that does not rush to control thought sees with greater accuracy. It knows that not every passing idea deserves attention. Not every worry needs a solution. Not every judgment is true. Over time, this practice transforms daily life. The grip of thought loosens. Worries appear, but do not take root. Self-doubt arises, but is not followed. Irritations come and go without turning into prolonged frustration. The need to argue with reality fades. There is less mental noise, less inner resistance, less suffering. Life becomes lighter, not because thoughts have disappeared, but because they are no longer mistaken for reality. This shift does not mean thought loses its usefulness. The mind still functions, still plans, still reflects, but it does so without excess. It no longer overthinks small details. It no longer replays conversations endlessly. It no longer turns fleeting emotions into personal crises. Thought remains, but its weight is gone. It becomes a tool rather than a master. A practical way to cultivate this awareness is to question thoughts as they arise, not to debate them, not to argue with them, but to see their nature clearly. If a thought says, "This will go wrong," is that an undeniable truth or just mental activity? If the mind says, "I am not good enough," where is the proof? If a worry appears about the future, does worrying change the future? When these questions are asked without attachment, thought is exposed for what it is: a passing mental event, nothing more. Meditation is the most direct way to experience this truth. Sitting in stillness, watching thought appear and disappear, it becomes clear that none of them last. None of them have substance. None of them need to be held on to. In this practice, the weight of the mind dissolves. Thought still arises, but it does not control. It no longer pulls the mind into unnecessary suffering. It no longer dictates emotions, choices, or identity. This realization is not about disengaging from life. It is about engaging fully, without the burden of unnecessary mental chatter, without the illusion that thoughts define reality, without the assumption that thinking more leads to more peace. When the mind sees the emptiness of thought, it is no longer enslaved by it. It moves freely, lightly, without resistance. And in that space, life is no longer lived through the filter of mental noise. It is experienced directly, as it truly is. When the mind sees the emptiness of thought, its grip begins to loosen. But seeing is not the same as breaking free. Even when the illusion of thoughts is exposed, old patterns remain. Thoughts may no longer be taken as absolute truth, but they still arise, repeating the same cycles, pulling attention in familiar directions. The weight of overthinking is not just in believing thoughts, but in being caught in them before awareness even has a chance to intervene. Recognizing this is one step, but transformation happens when the root of overthinking is revealed. And there is only one way to see it clearly: silence. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the absence of mental noise. In a world that fills every empty space with distraction, silence feels uncomfortable. The moment external noise fades, the mind's chatter becomes louder. It rushes to fill the space with unfinished thoughts, unresolved emotions, unanswered questions. It searches for something to hold on to, something to keep itself busy. This is why most people struggle with stillness. They assume the discomfort comes from boredom, but in reality, it comes from facing the mind without escape. Meditation is the mirror that reflects the mind back to itself. It does not change anything. It does not silence thoughts by force. It does not create a different reality. It simply shows what has always been there, hidden beneath layers of distraction, buried under endless analysis, masked by external stimulation. When everything else is stripped away, what remains is the raw nature of thought, the unconscious patterns that have shaped behavior, the unnoticed fears that have controlled decisions. And in that mirror, overthinking is exposed for what it is, not intelligence, not problem-solving, but an unconscious loop running on its own momentum. The first time the mind meets this silence, it resists. It does not want to be seen so clearly. It fights against stillness, filling meditation with restless energy, creating thoughts about the practice itself, searching for distractions, even in the act of sitting. It fears what will be revealed, not because the truth is unbearable, but because the mind has spent years running from it. But if the resistance is not fought, if it is simply observed, something shifts. The patterns become clearer. The mind begins to see its own habits, how it jumps from one thought to another, how it clings to certain emotions, how it builds stories out of fleeting impressions. The illusion of control fades, and the deeper roots of overthinking are exposed. One of the most profound realizations in meditation is that overthinking is not an action, it is a reaction. The mind does not decide to overthink. It simply reacts to discomfort by filling the space with thought. Anxiety arises, and instead of feeling it, the mind creates scenarios, trying to predict or control the future. Doubt appears, and instead of observing it, the mind spins into self-analysis, trying to find certainty where none exists. Every uncomfortable emotion becomes a trigger for thought, not because thought is useful, but because it is familiar. It creates the illusion of movement, a way to avoid sitting with what is. Meditation reveals this process in real time. As the mind settles, thoughts arise. Some are random, some are familiar, some are deeply personal. But instead of engaging with them, meditation allows them to be seen clearly. A worry appears, but instead of following it, there is awareness that it is just a thought. An old memory surfaces, but instead of getting lost in it, there is the recognition that it has no power unless it is fed. A negative judgment arises, but instead of believing it, it is simply noted and left alone. At first, the mind resists letting go. It tries to justify every thought, convincing itself that analysis is necessary, that certain thoughts must be followed, that without thinking, control will be lost. But as meditation deepens, something profound happens. The thoughts begin to slow, not because they are forced to stop, but because they are no longer being fueled. The habit of overthinking is broken not by fighting thoughts, but by losing interest in them. The mind starts to prefer stillness over mental noise, clarity over unnecessary complexity, presence over endless rumination. This is where real freedom begins. Overthinking is not something that needs to be fixed. It is something that dissolves when it is no longer needed. When the mind is no longer using thought to escape discomfort, when it no longer believes that more thinking leads to more control, when it sees directly that peace does not come from solving every question, but from letting go of unnecessary ones, the habit fades. It no longer has the same grip. Thoughts still arise, but they do not take over. Mental chatter still exists, but it is background noise, not an overwhelming force. Meditation also reveals another truth. Most of the thoughts that create suffering are not new. They are recycled patterns, echoes of past worries, variations of the same self-doubt, the same imagined fears, the same unresolved emotions disguised as new problems. The mind repeats itself, convincing itself that each new thought is important, but in meditation this repetition becomes obvious. The same patterns appear over and over, the same worries, the same doubts, the same mental loops, and once seen clearly, they lose their power. This is why deep meditation does not just quiet the mind temporarily. It uproots overthinking at its source. It does not teach the mind to avoid thoughts, nor does it force silence. It simply removes the illusion that thought is necessary for peace. It trains the mind to see thought as it is, impermanent, insubstantial, often unnecessary. And in that recognition, the need to overthink dissolves. The more this is practiced, the more effortless it becomes. At first, the mind may struggle. It may slip back into old habits. It may resist stillness. It may convince itself that meditation is pointless. But over time, the effort disappears. Thought loses its grip naturally. There is no need to force clarity. It emerges on its own. No need to stop thinking. It slows on its own. No need to fight the mind. It becomes still on its own. In daily life, this shift changes everything. There is less urgency in solving problems that do not need solving. There is less attachment to opinions that were never necessary. There is less mental clutter, less inner resistance, less wasted energy on thoughts that serve no purpose. The mind moves through life with more ease, more fluidity, more presence, not because it has been controlled, but because it has been understood. This is the power of meditation, not as a technique, but as a direct experience of truth. It does not require belief, does not depend on philosophy, does not demand effort. It is simply the practice of sitting, of observing, of allowing the mind to reveal itself. And in that space, the deepest patterns of overthinking are exposed, not through struggle, but through silence. What remains is something far greater than mental clarity. It is the realization that peace has always been there, waiting beneath the noise, beneath the layers of unnecessary thought, beneath the endless cycles of mental analysis. It was never lost. It was only hidden. And in the stillness of meditation, it is found again, not as something to be achieved, but as something that was never absent in the first place. When the mind settles into silence, its patterns are revealed. But even as thoughts slow down, there is something deeper that keeps them returning, something that pulls the mind back into restlessness even when it wants to be still. That force is desire. The constant reaching, the never-ending search for more, the feeling that something is missing. This craving does not just influence actions, it fuels overthinking. It is the unseen engine behind mental spirals, keeping the mind trapped in cycles of wanting, chasing, and never feeling complete. Buddhism teaches that craving is the root of suffering, not because wanting something is inherently bad, but because attachment to desires creates endless dissatisfaction. The mind clings to what it does not have, worries about what it might lose, and fixates on what it believes will bring happiness. And this attachment fuels an unstoppable mental loop. The mind does not rest because it is always searching. Even when a desire is fulfilled, another one takes its place. The cycle repeats, pulling attention away from the present, making peace impossible. Desire in itself is not the problem. The problem is the belief that fulfilling desires will bring lasting happiness. The mind assumes that if it just gets the right job, the perfect relationship, the ideal body, or the recognition it craves, it will finally be at peace. But peace never arrives in this way. Every external gain leads to new expectations, new comparisons, new fears. The more the mind attaches to desires, the more unstable it becomes. Every success is overshadowed by the fear of losing it. Every moment of pleasure is tainted by the thought that it will end. Ambition is often seen as a driving force, something that gives life meaning. But when ambition turns into obsession, it becomes a source of suffering. The mind fixates on goals, believing that happiness lies in their achievement. Yet, the moment one goal is reached, another takes its place. This is the illusion of progress, the belief that fulfillment is always just one step away. The problem is that this step never ends. No matter how much is achieved, the craving for more remains. The mind stays restless, always looking ahead, never content with what is. Comparison adds another layer to this suffering. The mind does not just crave, it measures itself against others. It creates mental stories about how far behind or ahead it is, how much better or worse it appears in the eyes of society. This constant evaluation fuels overthinking, making peace impossible. Instead of appreciating what is present, the mind is caught in an endless race, trying to match an ever-changing standard. Overthinking is not just about fear or doubt. It is deeply tied to desire. The mind analyzes, plans, worries, and replays because it believes it must control every outcome. It believes it must ensure success, avoid failure, secure happiness. The stronger the craving, the stronger the overthinking. If the mind desires love, it overanalyzes relationships. If it desires success, it fixates on every detail of work. If it desires perfection, it criticizes itself endlessly. Desire turns the mind into an engine that never stops running, burning energy over things that never bring real peace. Detachment does not mean giving up on life. It means freeing the mind from the illusion that happiness is found in chasing something outside of itself. It means seeing through the lie that more will ever be enough. It is the realization that contentment is not in what is gained, but in what is let go. When the mind is no longer ruled by craving, it becomes light. It no longer needs to overthink, because it no longer believes that thinking will complete what is already whole. Breaking free from this cycle requires seeing how it works. The mind must look directly at desire, not with resistance, but with awareness. It must observe how every craving leads to attachment, how every attachment leads to fear, how every fear leads to overthinking. The mind must question whether the things it chases actually bring the peace it seeks. When this is seen clearly, detachment happens naturally. The mind no longer clings to desires because it sees that they do not hold the happiness they promised. There is nothing wrong with enjoying life, but enjoyment is different from attachment. A person who enjoys something fully in the moment, without needing it to last forever, experiences true freedom. But a person who attaches to enjoyment, fearing its loss, turning it into an identity, making it the source of their happiness, becomes trapped. The mind becomes addicted to keeping what cannot be kept, to chasing what always changes. This is the root of suffering, and this is what fuels endless thought. Meditation reveals this attachment in real time. Sitting in silence, the mind becomes restless. It craves stimulation, it wants movement, it searches for something to hold on to. But in that craving, the pattern becomes clear. The mind is always running, not because it has to, but because it has never known anything else. The moment the mind stops feeding desire, something unexpected happens. Stillness no longer feels empty. Peace no longer feels like something to be earned. The mind begins to rest in itself without needing anything more. The greatest fear people have about letting go of desires is the belief that life will lose meaning. If there is no craving, no ambition, no striving, will there be anything left? But meaning is not found in attachment. It is found in presence. The deepest joy comes not from getting what is wanted, but from fully experiencing what is. A mind that is free from craving does not lose direction. It moves with greater clarity. It still acts, still creates, still enjoys, but without the weight of expectation, without the suffering of attachment. Over time, this shift changes everything. Thoughts no longer spiral around wanting and lacking. The need to compare weakens. The urgency to prove something disappears. The mind no longer wastes energy on what is outside of its control. It stops trying to force life to match its expectations and instead meets life as it is. This is not passivity. It is the deepest form of freedom. It is the ability to engage fully without being owned by what is engaged in. This understanding is not intellectual. It must be experienced directly. When the mind sits in stillness, observing itself, it begins to see the root of its suffering. It sees that desire is not just about objects, status, or success. It is woven into every aspect of thought. It is present in the way the mind clings to identity, to beliefs, to control. It is the cause of every mental struggle. And when this is fully seen, the grip of desire weakens. The mind stops running. Overthinking fades, not because thought is forced to stop, but because the need for it disappears. True freedom is not found in having everything. It is found in needing nothing. This does not mean rejecting life, but embracing it without grasping. It means allowing each moment to be enough as it is. When the mind no longer believes that something is missing, overthinking loses its foundation. There is no longer the need to chase, to analyze, to compare. There is only presence. And in that presence, the mind is finally at peace. When the weight of desire is lifted, the mind becomes lighter. It no longer chases after an endless list of wants, nor does it measure itself against an invisible standard of success. But there is still something that keeps overthinking alive, something more subtle than craving, yet just as powerful. It is the fear of not knowing, the uncertainty of the future, the unpredictability of life, the questions without clear answers. The mind clings to the illusion that knowing more, predicting more, and preparing more will bring security. But in reality, it only brings more mental noise. The more the mind tries to control the unknown, the more restless it becomes. Overthinking thrives on uncertainty. The mind believes that by thinking enough, it can remove doubt, find the perfect answer, and eliminate risk. But uncertainty is not a problem to be solved. It is a reality of life. No matter how much thought is poured into predicting the future, it will always remain unknown. The belief that more thinking will bring certainty is an illusion. It does not lead to clarity. It leads to exhaustion. It does not bring security. It creates more doubt. Buddhism teaches that true freedom comes not from eliminating uncertainty, but from making peace with it. The mind does not need to know everything. It does not need to have every answer. It does not need to control what happens next. The more it accepts the unknown, the quieter it becomes. This does not mean passivity. It means trusting that life unfolds with or without excessive thought, that clarity arises not from forcing answers, but from allowing space for them to emerge. The mind resists uncertainty because it equates not knowing with danger. It assumes that if something is unpredictable, it must be prepared for. It runs through scenarios, analyzes every possibility, builds mental defenses against things that may never happen. But this habit does not protect. It only drains. The truth is, most of the things the mind worries about never unfold the way they are imagined. The future is not shaped by thoughts alone. It is shaped by action, by response, by adaptation. Overthinking does not prepare the mind for uncertainty. It blinds it with unnecessary fear. Letting go of the need to know everything does not mean becoming careless. It means understanding that knowledge has limits, that not all answers exist in advance, that clarity comes through experience, not through endless thought. Some of the greatest insights arise when the mind is no longer struggling to find them. The strongest decisions come when the pressure to be certain is removed. Life does not demand absolute knowing. It only asks for presence, for openness, for the willingness to engage without needing guarantees. Meditation is one of the most direct ways to experience this shift. In silence, the mind is confronted with its own discomfort, with uncertainty. It reaches for something to hold on to, searches for conclusions, tries to label and define what cannot be fully understood. But if this impulse is observed rather than indulged, something changes. The mind realizes that it does not need to have all the answers in order to be at peace. It does not need to solve every question in order to move forward. The habit of grasping at certainty weakens, and a new kind of clarity emerges, not one built on absolute knowing, but one rooted in deep trust. Over time, this understanding transforms daily life. The fear of making the wrong decision fades. The pressure to predict the future weakens. The need to have everything figured out loses its power. Instead of seeing uncertainty as something to battle, the mind begins to see it as something natural, something that has always been part of life. Every moment is unknown. Every breath is uncertain. The future has never been guaranteed. And yet, life continues. The mind has always adapted. Fear has never been a requirement for survival. This is where true stillness arises, not from controlling thought, not from predicting outcomes, but from trusting the unknown. A mind that does not fear uncertainty is a mind that does not waste energy trying to resist it. It is a mind that moves with life instead of against it. It no longer needs to grasp, to analyze endlessly, to demand answers that do not yet exist. It simply meets each moment as it comes, unburdened by the need to control what cannot be controlled. Some of the greatest suffering in life comes from trying to force certainty where none exists. People make choices based on fear rather than wisdom, trying to eliminate all risks, trying to ensure that nothing unexpected happens. But life is not meant to be predictable. It is not meant to be controlled through over-analysis. It is meant to be lived. When the mind releases its attachment to certainty, it moves with a freedom that was never possible before. It no longer needs to overthink every step. It no longer wastes energy on imaginary fears. It no longer clings to the false comfort of knowing. Instead, it learns to trust, not in certainty, but in its own ability to face whatever comes. This is not recklessness. It is clarity. It is the ability to make decisions without needing perfect knowledge. It is the confidence to step forward without waiting for every variable to be known. It is the strength to let go of unnecessary mental struggle and embrace the reality that not knowing is not a weakness. It is part of life itself. When this is deeply understood, overthinking loses its foundation. The mind no longer spirals into endless analysis, because it no longer believes that certainty is necessary for peace. It no longer clings to thought, because it knows that thoughts do not provide guarantees. It no longer wastes energy on fear, because it sees that fear does not change the nature of the unknown. Over time, this shift becomes effortless. The habit of overanalyzing weakens. The need for absolute answers disappears. Life becomes lighter, not because it has become more predictable, but because the mind no longer demands that it be so. This is true liberation, not from uncertainty itself, but from the belief that uncertainty must be resisted. A mind that no longer fears the unknown is a mind that is finally free. It no longer carries the weight of imagined futures, no longer wastes time trying to force control where none is possible. It moves with ease, with presence, with trust. And in that space, overthinking fades, not through effort, not through struggle, but because there is simply nothing left for it to cling to. When the mind lets go of its obsession with certainty, something surprising happens. The fear of the unknown fades, but something else rises to the surface. Mental exhaustion, not from uncertainty, not from overanalysis, but from sheer overload. The mind is not just caught in loops because it seeks control. It is also overwhelmed because it has been fed too much, too often, without rest. There is no space to process, no silence between thoughts, no pause between inputs. The world floods the mind with information, and without realizing it, the mind becomes bloated, sluggish, unable to distinguish what is essential from what is noise. Modern life is built on excess, not just in material things, but in mental consumption. The constant stream of news, opinions, entertainment, notifications, conversations, advertisements, all of it pulls attention in 100 different directions. The mind absorbs it all, whether it wants to or not. Every bit of information adds weight. Every external stimulus feeds new thoughts. The mind does not have time to digest what it takes in, yet it keeps reaching for more. It is like eating without stopping, consuming without processing, swallowing without digesting. And just like the body struggles with overeating, the mind struggles with overthinking when it is overfed. Buddhism teaches that the mind reflects what it is given. A mind constantly exposed to chaos becomes chaotic. A mind filled with fear-based information becomes anxious. A mind trained to jump from one distraction to another loses the ability to be still. The more input it receives, the more restless it becomes. And yet, most people never question this. They assume that more knowledge, more updates, more stimulation will make them better prepared, more informed, more in control. But the opposite is true. Too much information does not bring clarity, it brings confusion. Too many opinions do not bring understanding, they bring doubt. Too much mental input doesn't make the mind sharper, it makes it fragmented, overworked, and drained. The mind was never meant to process infinite amounts of information. It was never meant to hold the weight of the entire world. It was designed for presence, for clarity, for focus. But in a world where everything demands attention, the mind is constantly pulled in different directions, leaving it stretched thin. Over time, it loses the ability to rest. Even when there is no immediate problem, the mind feels heavy, burdened, unable to slow down. It becomes addicted to stimulation, mistaking endless consumption for progress. Reducing mental inputs is not about ignorance. It is about discernment. It is the ability to choose what enters the mind and what does not. It is the discipline to stop feeding it unnecessary clutter. A mind that is constantly exposed to everything cannot focus on anything. But a mind that is selective, that knows when to step away, that understands the power of less, becomes sharp, clear, and at ease. The habit of overthinking often comes from overexposure. When the mind consumes too much, it does not know what to prioritize. It treats every thought, every problem, every piece of information as equally important. It jumps from one thing to another, never settling. But just like the body benefits from fasting, the mind benefits from space. The more unnecessary inputs are reduced, the more the mind can breathe. One of the strongest sources of mental overload is digital consumption. Social media, news, entertainment, all of it competes for attention. Every time the mind engages, it absorbs something. Even a few seconds of scrolling introduce dozens of new ideas, new comparisons, new thoughts to process. The mind does not have time to sit with anything. It is always being pulled to the next thing. This creates an addiction to input, making stillness feel unnatural. But when mental consumption is reduced, clarity returns. The mind becomes lighter, thoughts slow down, and overthinking begins to fade. It is not just external content that overwhelms the mind. Conversations, arguments, opinions from others, all of these add to mental clutter. The mind takes in everything it hears, storing it, analyzing it, replaying it. The more unnecessary conversations it engages in, the more it fills itself with external worries, external judgments, external conflicts. A mind that is always responding to outside noise cannot hear itself. It becomes reactive rather than intentional. But when it steps back, when it stops absorbing what does not serve it, it regains its center. It no longer carries the weight of every passing conversation. It no longer lets the words of others dictate its thoughts. This is not isolation, it is refinement. It is the ability to choose what is worth thinking about and what is not. A cluttered mind is not a wise mind. A mind filled with too much is not powerful, it is exhausted. Power comes from focus, from depth, from the ability to hold one thing at a time. The strongest minds are not the ones that know everything. They are the ones that know what to ignore. Meditation reveals this truth clearly. When the mind sits in silence, it begins to see how much unnecessary noise it carries. Thoughts appear that have no relevance. Worries arise that were taken from outside influences. Distractions try to pull attention away from the present. But as the practice deepens, something shifts. The mind starts to let go of what does not belong to it. It stops chasing thoughts that do not matter. It stops replaying inputs that were never useful. It learns to protect its space. And in that space, overthinking loses its foundation. The most effective way to reduce overanalysis is not to force thought to stop. It is to stop feeding it excess material. When the mind is given less, it thinks less. When it is no longer overwhelmed, it no longer overreacts. When it is not constantly pulled in different directions, it can focus, settle, and see with greater clarity. This practice extends beyond meditation. It is a way of living, choosing what to engage with, what to consume, what to participate in, not absorbing every piece of news, not reacting to every passing opinion, not indulging in every mental impulse. It is about creating intentional gaps, spaces of quiet where the mind can process rather than accumulate. A life that is constantly filled with noise does not create wisdom, it creates stress. But a life with space allows the mind to function as it was meant to. Over time, this shift transforms how the mind operates. It no longer needs constant input to feel engaged. It no longer jumps from one stimulus to another. It no longer clings to information that adds no real value. It becomes more selective, more intentional, more present. And as a result, overthinking weakens, not because effort is made to stop it, but because it is no longer being fed the excess it needs to survive. The greatest mistake people make is assuming that more knowledge, more content, more mental engagement leads to greater understanding. But understanding comes not from accumulation, but from clarity. And clarity only arises when there is space. A mind that is not overloaded is a mind that is naturally still. It does not spiral into unnecessary loops. It does not drown in details. It does not waste energy on things that do not matter. It stays where it needs to be, thinks only when necessary, and rests when thinking is not required. This is not detachment from life. It is the ability to experience life fully, without the constant interference of excess thought. It is the ability to engage deeply, without being consumed. It is the strength to know when to step away, when to be silent, when to stop adding more to what is already enough. And in that simplicity, overthinking dissolves, not because it was conquered, but because it was no longer needed. When the mind is no longer overwhelmed with unnecessary inputs, a new challenge emerges. It is not the absence of external noise that unsettles. It is the sudden awareness of an unfamiliar quiet. The mind, so accustomed to processing, consuming and reacting, now stands before an empty space. But instead of resting in it, it rushes to fill the gap. This is where overthinking takes on a new form, not as a reaction to external stimulation, but as an inability to simply be. The modern world has conditioned the mind to equate stillness with inactivity, inactivity with unproductivity, and unproductivity with failure. But Zen and Taoist wisdom reveal the opposite, that true power, clarity, and even transformation arise not from doing more, but from doing nothing at all. Stillness is not a void. It is not a lack of engagement with life. It is the most natural state of the mind, a state where thought does not need to be forced, action does not need to be rushed, and clarity emerges effortlessly. But because the mind is conditioned to movement, stillness feels unnatural. The moment nothing is happening, the mind seeks something to engage with, something to solve, something to process. But doing nothing is not passive. It is an art. It is the ability to allow thoughts to settle, to let unnecessary action drop away, to trust that the mind functions best when it is not forced into constant effort. Overthinking is a form of mental overexertion. It assumes that more thinking leads to more control, that constant mental effort will lead to better decisions, better outcomes, better results. But the greatest wisdom does not arise from forced thinking. It arises from an open, unburdened mind. Some of the greatest insights come not when the mind is struggling to find answers, but when it is given space to rest. Taoist philosophy calls this Wu Wei, or effortless action. It is the state in which the best decisions, the most creative solutions, and the deepest understanding emerge naturally, not from force, but from flow. The obsession with being productive has turned stillness into something unnatural. People feel guilty for resting. They assume that if they are not actively thinking, planning, or solving, they are wasting time. But the mind, like the body, has a rhythm. It needs movement, but it also needs rest. Just as a muscle fatigues when overworked, the mind loses clarity when it is never given stillness. It becomes dull, exhausted, inefficient. True wisdom comes not from doing more, but from knowing when to stop. Zen practice teaches that when the mind is still, it does not become empty, it becomes clear, Thought is not suppressed, nor is it indulged. It arises and falls naturally without attachment. This is the foundation of true awareness. It is not about controlling thought, but about seeing it as it is, fleeting, impermanent, often unnecessary. The mind that does nothing is not inactive. It is deeply present. It does not interfere with thought, nor does it cling to it. It simply allows space for clarity to emerge on its own. In modern life, the fear of stillness is everywhere. People fill their days with distractions, their moments of quiet with screens, their free time with endless consumption. The idea of simply sitting without agenda, without a goal, feels foreign. Yet this is the very thing the mind needs most. Stillness is not about escaping life. It is about meeting it fully. It is about experiencing the present without needing to alter it, without the mind rushing to the past or the future, without the need to fill silence with noise. Overthinking thrives on urgency. It tells the mind that everything must be figured out immediately, that every problem must be solved now, that every uncertainty must be eliminated. But wisdom arises when the mind steps back, when it stops forcing, when it allows solutions to unfold in their own time. The more the mind learns to rest in stillness, the less it feels the need to control. The less it controls, the less it overthinks. The Taoist masters spoke of the way water moves through the world. It does not struggle, it does not force, it does not resist. It flows, it adapts, it moves with effortless intelligence. The mind is meant to do the same. But instead of flowing, it often fights against life, trying to force clarity, trying to make things happen faster, trying to control what is beyond its reach. This is what creates exhaustion. But the moment the mind stops fighting, stops pushing, stops grasping, peace arises. Thought becomes light. Action becomes natural. Life unfolds without strain. Doing nothing is not avoidance, it is mastery. It is the ability to sit in stillness without needing to escape. It is the ability to trust that clarity does not come from force, but from space. It is the ability to move with life rather than against it. This is why the greatest minds throughout history, philosophers, poets, spiritual masters, valued solitude, silence, and stillness. They understood that true understanding doesn't come from overthinking. It comes from listening to the mind when it is quiet. Meditation is the direct experience of this truth. It is the practice of sitting in nothingness, of observing without interference, of allowing thought to rise and fall without reaction. In meditation, the mind begins to see its own patterns, the way it rushes to fill gaps, the way it clings to thought, the way it resists emptiness. But if the mind does not interfere, if it simply allows stillness to exist, something profound happens. The need to overthink dissolves. The need to grasp at certainty weakens. The mind becomes lighter, not because it has solved everything, but because it no longer believes that everything needs solving. In daily life, this shift changes everything. The tendency to rush disappears. The need to react to every thought fades. The belief that mental effort equals wisdom is replaced with the understanding that clarity arises naturally when given space. Overthinking is not fought, it is outgrown. The mind stops engaging in unnecessary effort because it sees that effort is often the very thing blocking insight. Most people believe that their biggest breakthroughs come when they push harder, try more, think longer. But some of the greatest discoveries, the most profound realizations, the clearest decisions, come in moments of stillness. When the mind is not looking for an answer, the answer reveals itself. When the mind stops chasing, what is needed arrives. This is the paradox of doing nothing. It is the most powerful thing a person can do. Over time, this understanding becomes effortless. The mind no longer feels guilty for resting. It no longer seeks unnecessary distractions. It no longer mistakes stillness for stagnation. It learns that wisdom doesn't come from excessive thinking, but from deep presence. It understands that doing nothing is not a waste of time. It is where time is truly experienced. It is the space where clarity, insight, and true peace are found. In the end, the greatest lesson is simple. The mind does not need to do so much. It does not need to force every outcome, analyze every detail, or solve every mystery. It only needs to stop, to breathe, to trust that the answers it seeks will come, not through struggle, but through stillness. And in that stillness, overthinking fades. Not through effort, not through control, but because it was never needed in the first place. When the mind learns to be still, its need to react begins to fade. The urge to control, to force solutions, to fill every moment with unnecessary effort weakens. But there is another force that keeps the mind restless: speech. Not just external conversations, but the endless internal dialogue that fuels overthinking. Words are powerful, shaping perception, influencing emotions, and determining how thoughts unfold. The more the mind engages in constant verbal expression, the more it solidifies patterns of overanalysis. Speech and overthinking are deeply connected. Talking less does not just create external silence, it quiets the mind at its core. Words carry energy. The more they are spoken, the more they reinforce certain mental patterns. Unnecessary talking feeds unnecessary thinking. Every conversation leaves an imprint. Every exchange adds to the mind's processing load. But silence is not just the absence of words. It is the space where mental clarity emerges. A mind that is not constantly engaged in speaking gains the ability to observe rather than react, to reflect rather than impulsively respond. Overthinking often finds its fuel in excessive speech. When thoughts remain unspoken, they lose their grip. But when they are verbalized repeatedly, they take on weight, becoming more real, more powerful, more difficult to release. A single doubt, when spoken aloud multiple times, turns into a fixation. A minor worry, when discussed at length, becomes an overwhelming problem. Words amplify thought. They give it structure, make it harder to dismiss. This is why those who talk excessively often struggle with overactive minds. Their own words feed their mental noise. Restraint in speech is one of the oldest practices in Buddhist wisdom. It is not just about avoiding gossip or unnecessary conversation. It is about preserving energy. Every word spoken uses mental energy, and the more careless the speech, the more scattered the mind becomes. A person who speaks without intention also thinks without clarity. Their mind jumps from one idea to another, never settling, never quieting. But a person who speaks only when necessary develops a mind that is focused, steady, and at ease. Verbal restraint does not mean withdrawing from communication. It means being selective, speaking with purpose, knowing when words are needed and when silence is the better choice. It means recognizing that not every thought deserves expression, that not every opinion needs to be shared, that speech should serve clarity rather than clutter the mind further. Overthinking thrives on excessive discussion. When a problem is spoken about repeatedly, it gains strength. Instead of resolving itself, it expands. Instead of becoming clearer, it becomes more complicated. This is why people who talk endlessly about their worries often feel worse rather than better. Verbal repetition reinforces mental loops. turning fleeting concerns into deeply ingrained struggles. Silence, on the other hand, acts as a reset. It allows the mind to process information without overloading it with more. It creates space where thought can settle, where emotions can be observed rather than endlessly dissected. Speaking less does not just change how others perceive a person, it changes how a person perceives their own thoughts. There is a reason why great wisdom is often spoken in few words. The deepest truths do not require excessive explanation. The most powerful insights are often the simplest. Speech that is thoughtful, intentional, and concise reflects a mind that is clear, disciplined, and calm. But speech that is uncontrolled, reactive, and endless reflects a mind that is restless, confused, and scattered. Talking less also changes relationships. Many conflicts, misunderstandings, and emotional struggles arise not from real issues, but from excessive words. Arguments escalate because of unnecessary talking. Over-explanation creates confusion rather than clarity. Saying too much often weakens the message rather than strengthening it. But when speech is measured, when words are chosen carefully, communication becomes more meaningful, more precise, more impactful. Buddhist monks practice noble silence, not just as a discipline, but as a way to cultivate inner peace. They understand that reducing external chatter also reduces internal chatter. A quiet mouth leads to a quiet mind. A person who speaks less naturally begins to think less, to overanalyze less, to react less impulsively. Instead of filling silence with unnecessary words, they learn to embrace it, to find comfort in it, to let it sharpen their awareness. Meditation deepens this understanding. When sitting in stillness, the mind becomes aware of its own internal dialogue. It sees how thoughts form, how they pull attention, how they create imaginary conversations, how they generate unnecessary emotions. And in this awareness, a choice arises: to engage with the mental chatter or to let it go. Just as a person can choose not to speak aloud, they can also choose not to engage with every passing thought. This is how both external and internal speech begin to quiet down. In daily life, this practice becomes transformative. Words are no longer wasted on things that do not matter. Conversations become more meaningful because they are rooted in presence rather than impulse. The mind no longer creates unnecessary narratives, no longer clings to endless internal dialogue, no longer wastes energy on overanalyzing every interaction. There is a natural lightness, a quiet confidence, a clarity that emerges when speech is no longer excessive. Talking less does not mean withdrawing from life. It means engaging with greater awareness. It means recognizing that true wisdom is not in saying more, but in saying only what is needed. It means understanding that words, like thoughts, should be chosen carefully, used with purpose, and released when they no longer serve. Over time, this shift rewires the mind. Overthinking weakens because it is no longer reinforced by unnecessary speech. Mental clarity grows because energy is no longer wasted on constant verbal expression. The mind learns to rest in silence rather than trying to fill every gap with words. And in that silence, a deeper understanding arises, not through effort, but through the simple act of saying less, listening more, and allowing space for real clarity to emerge. This is how talking less calms the inner dialogue. It is not suppression, it is not withdrawal. It is mastery over speech, mastery over thought, mastery over the need to fill every moment with sound. And when that mastery is developed, overthinking dissolves, not through force, but because it is no longer being fed. After everything we have explored, one truth stands clear. Overthinking is not a sign of intelligence, but a burden the mind carries when it forgets how to be free. Thought is a tool, but when it takes control, it becomes a prison. The wisdom of Buddhism teaches that the key to escaping this cycle is not in thinking harder, but in thinking less. Not in grasping for certainty, but in surrendering to the flow of life. Not in chasing after answers, but in resting in awareness. The mind clings, craves, and resists, creating endless loops of analysis, worry, and doubt. But the moment it learns to let go of attachments, of self-image, of the need to control, the weight disappears. Silence becomes a sanctuary. Presence replaces over-analysis. Simplicity dissolves unnecessary complexity. And what remains is clarity, peace, and an unshakable calm. There is no grand technique, no hidden secret, no complex philosophy to memorize. The way out of overthinking is found in stillness, in trust, in the simple act of doing less, talking less, holding on less. The quieter the mind becomes, the more it sees that it was never truly trapped. It was only tangled in its own thoughts. And in that realization, the freedom you've always searched for is finally yours. Now, I want to hear from you. What was the biggest insight that struck you in this journey? Which Buddhist truth resonated with you the most? Drop a comment below. I read them all, and your words could inspire someone else who is struggling to break free from overthinking. And if you want more wisdom like this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, because a mind at peace isn't something you stumble upon. It's something you cultivate, one step at a time. Let's walk that path together. See you in the next one.